The black Mercedes turned onto Evergreen Boulevard at 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon, its tires whispering against rain-slicked asphalt. Eleanor Ashford sat in the back seat, spine perfectly straight, hands folded over the Hermes Kelly bag resting in her lap. Outside the tinted windows, Seattle's late autumn light filtered through skeletal branches, casting shifting shadows across manicured lawns and hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. The houses here in Bellevue Hills didn't merely suggest wealth, they demanded acknowledgement of it, each mansion a fortress of stone and glass perched above the city like a crown. Eleanor's driver, Marcus, had worked for the family for 11 years. He knew better than to speak unless spoken to, knew the precise temperature she preferred in the vehicle, knew to avoid potholes even when it meant crossing into the opposite lane. The silence between them had become its own language, one built on years of unspoken understanding and generous Christmas bonuses. The car climbed the final hill, and the Ashford estate came into view. 12,000 square feet of Northwest contemporary architecture, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the clouds and threw them back at the sky. The fountain in the circular driveway had been turned off for the season, its tiered marble basins dry and waiting for spring. Eleanor noticed a few fallen leaves scattered across the front steps. Someone would need to sweep those before nightfall. Marcus brought the car to a stop beneath the covered entrance. He moved to open her door, but Eleanor was already stepping out, heels clicking against the cobblestones with the precision of a metronome. She didn't thank him. That would have been redundant, a break in the efficient machinery of their routine. He would park the car in the garage, return to his apartment above it, and wait for tomorrow's schedule. Everything in its place. The front door opened before Eleanor could reach it. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, stood in the threshold with the kind of composed expression that came from 2 decades of domestic service to the extremely wealthy. 58 years old, originally from Taiwan, never a hair out of place or a wrinkle in her uniform. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford. Shall I bring tea to your office?" Eleanor handed her the raincoat she'd worn that morning. "Not yet. I need to check on the girls first." Mrs. Chen's face remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. Eleanor rarely visited the care room before 6. The deviation from routine was notable enough to register. "Of course, ma'am. Nurse Jennifer is with them now. They finished their afternoon therapy session 20 minutes ago." Eleanor moved through the foyer without responding, her footsteps muted by the thick Persian runner that stretched down the hallway. The house smelled the way it always did, a careful blend of lemon polish, fresh flowers, and the faint antiseptic tang that clung to spaces designed for medical care. She passed the formal living room where no one ever sat, the dining room with its table for 12 that hadn't hosted a dinner party in 5 years, the music room where Andrew's piano stood covered beneath a silk sheet. The care room occupied the entire southeast corner of the main floor. Eleanor had chosen the location herself during the renovation, insisting on maximum natural light and easy access from multiple hallways. The door stood slightly ajar, and she could hear Jennifer's voice inside pitched into that sing-song register adults use with children. "That's right, sweetheart. Can you look at the red ball, Ruby honey, the red one?" Eleanor's hand paused on the doorknob. Through the gap, she could see Jennifer kneeling beside one of the custom medical recliners, holding up a soft foam ball. Ruby, or was it Pearl, sat strapped into the chair, her small body held upright by careful padding and supportive cushions. The child's eyes drifted somewhere past Jennifer's shoulder, focused on nothing in particular. Eleanor pushed the door open wider. The nurse looked up, surprise crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "Mrs. Ashford, I didn't expect you until later. Change of plans. How were they today?" Jennifer stood brushing invisible lint from her scrubs. She was young, 28, maybe 30, with the kind of relentless optimism that Eleanor found both admirable and exhausting. "Good days, ma'am. Pearl had a solid session with the physical therapist this morning. We worked on head control exercises, and she maintained position for almost 3 minutes. And Ruby?" The optimism dimmed slightly. Ruby was a bit restless. "Nothing concerning, just one of those days. The speech therapist tried some new oral motor exercises, but I understand." Eleanor crossed to the nearest chair, looking down at the small face turned toward the window. 5 years old, the same age Eleanor had been when she'd learned to ride a bicycle, when she'd started piano lessons, when she'd stood on stage in her first dance recital. 5 years old, and her daughters had never spoken, never walked, never reached for her with anything resembling intention. They looked peaceful. They usually are at this hour. Jennifer moved to check the position of Pearl's feeding tube. The afternoon light seems to calm them. I've been meaning to mention they've been more alert lately. Small changes, but I've noticed them tracking movement better, especially when the door at the far end of the room opened. Eleanor turned, expecting Mrs. Chen or perhaps Dr. Morrison making one of his weekly check-ins. Instead, a man entered carrying a mop and a yellow cleaning bucket. He wore a navy blue janitor's uniform with the name Caleb embroidered over the chest pocket. Mid-30s lean-build hair that needed cutting. He stopped when he saw Eleanor, bucket handle creaking in his grip. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize you were here. I can come back later." His voice was softer than she'd expected, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Somewhere rural, maybe. Eastern Washington or Idaho. Before Eleanor could respond, something happened. Ruby made a sound. Not the usual throaty hum or cry of discomfort. Something different. A syllable almost. The room went absolutely still. Jennifer froze mid-adjustment of Pearl's blanket. The man with the mop, Caleb, turned toward Ruby's chair, his weathered face transforming into something Eleanor had never seen directed at her children. Recognition, understanding, hope. He set the bucket down with careful silence and crossed to Ruby in 3 quiet steps. His work boots made no sound against the hardwood. When he knelt beside the chair, he was at exact eye level with the little girl, and his hands, rough, callous, stained at the fingertips, reached out to rest gently on the armrests. "Hey there, sweetheart." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm here, it's okay." Ruby's eyes, which had been drifting and unfocused just moments before, locked onto his face. Eleanor felt her throat constrict. She'd paid specialists from 3 countries, had flown in the head of pediatric neurology from Johns Hopkins, had installed equipment that cost more than most houses. None of them had ever made her daughter look at them the way Ruby was looking at this janitor in his cheap uniform. "That's my girl." Caleb's thumb moved in a small circle against the padded armrest. "You're doing so good today." And then the impossible happened. "Da." The sound came from Ruby's throat, small and fragile as a soap bubble, but unmistakable. Eleanor's Hermes bag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud against the carpet. Her legs went liquid. The room tilted sideways, then righted itself, but nothing felt solid anymore. Did she? Jennifer's voice came from somewhere far away. Did she just da-da? This time from Pearl. The other twin, strapped into her chair on the opposite side of the room, had turned her head, an act that required enormous effort. Eleanor knew, weeks of therapy for incremental progress, and was looking at Caleb with the same focused intensity as her sister. "Daddy?" Ruby again, clearer this time. The syllable hung in the air like a bell tone, impossible and perfect and completely devastating. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Her chest had locked ribs compressed around lungs that refused to expand. 5 years. 5 years of silence, so complete that the specialists had used terms like profound developmental delay and minimal cognitive response and realistic expectations. 5 years of sitting beside their beds reading books they couldn't process, singing songs they couldn't hear, loving them with a desperation that had slowly calcified into something harder, something that hurt less. And now they were speaking. Not to her, to him. Caleb's eyes shone with moisture. He blinked rapidly, clearing his vision, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "That's right. Daddy's here. Both of you such smart girls. You're both so smart." He glanced toward Pearl, and Eleanor watched her younger daughter, younger by 7 minutes, not that it had ever mattered, track his movement with her eyes. Pearl's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The muscles in her small jaw worked with visible effort. "Daddy." The syllables came out broken, uneven, but they came. Jennifer had pressed both hands over her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping onto her scrubs. Eleanor remained frozen by the door, one hand clutched around her own throat, as if she could physically hold herself together. This wasn't possible. It violated every diagnosis, every prognosis, every carefully managed expectation she'd built over 5 years of incremental losses. Caleb stayed kneeling between the 2 chairs. He reached out with both hands, one to Ruby, one to Pearl, and let his fingers rest against theirs. The girls couldn't grasp, couldn't squeeze back, but they were looking at him with such focus that Eleanor felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain exactly, something worse. Recognition that she'd been absent from her own children's lives, that she'd hired people to love them because she couldn't bear to keep breaking her own heart. "You're both so brave," Caleb's whisper carried across the silent room. So brave." Eleanor took a step backward, then another. Her heel caught on the edge of the Persian runner, and she stumbled, catching herself against the doorframe. The small sound made Caleb turn, made his weathered face register her presence for the first time since the girls had spoken. His expression shifted surprise, then something that might have been concern or guilt or simple awareness that he'd witnessed something he wasn't meant to see. "Mrs. Ashford, she held up one hand, cutting him off. Her voice came out steady through sheer force of will, years of boardroom discipline overriding the chaos in her chest. "Continue with your work. Jennifer, note the time and document everything they said. I need to make some calls." She turned and walked down the hallway on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Behind her, she heard Jennifer's soft sob and Caleb's gentle voice resuming its quiet murmur. The sounds followed Eleanor through the music room, past Andrew's covered piano, into her office at the far end of the house. Only when the door clicked shut behind her did Eleanor allow herself to collapse into the leather chair behind her desk. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She pressed her palms flat against the cool wood surface, trying to ground herself in something solid, something real. The office looked exactly as it had that morning. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls filled with leather-bound first editions and framed photographs from another lifetime. Her degrees from Stanford and Harvard hung beside Andrew's from Princeton. His corner of the desk still held his favorite pen, a crystal paperweight from their honeymoon in Scotland, a small bronze sculpture of a sailboat. She hadn't moved any of it, hadn't been able to. Eleanor's laptop sat closed in front of her, its silver surface reflecting the gray afternoon light from the window. She should open it, should call Dr. Morrison immediately, should document what had just happened, should begin the careful process of understanding how 2 children with profound neurological impairments had suddenly acquired the ability to form words. Instead, she sat motionless, replaying the scene in the care room. The way Ruby's eyes had tracked Caleb's movement, the focus in Pearl's face when she turned her head, the unmistakable intention behind their sounds. These weren't random vocalizations or reflexive cries. They were words, directed, meaningful, and they'd called him Daddy. The rational part of Eleanor's mind, the part that had built a fortune in commercial real estate development, that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and managed portfolios across 3 continents, immediately began constructing explanations. Perhaps the girls had heard staff members use the word. Perhaps it was simple mimicry, the kind of parroting that didn't require true comprehension. Perhaps Dr. Morrison had been wrong about their cognitive abilities, and they'd been processing language all along, but lacked the motor control to produce it. But none of those explanations addressed the look in their eyes, the recognition, the connection. Eleanor pulled open her desk drawer and retrieved the thick binder that documented her daughter's medical history. 5 years compressed into plastic sleeves and clinical language. She flipped to the neurology section, finding Dr. Morrison's most recent assessment from 8 weeks ago. Ruby and Pearl Ashford, identical twins, age 5 years, 3 months. Diagnosis, spastic quadriplegia, secondary to perinatal hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Global developmental delay across all domains. Prognosis for independent ambulation poor. Prognosis for meaningful speech acquisition, unlikely given severity of oral motor dysfunction and cognitive impairment. Recommend continued supportive care, realistic goal setting with family. Realistic goal setting. Eleanor had heard that phrase so many times it had lost meaning. What it meant stripped of clinical politeness was this: your daughters will never walk, they will never talk, they will never feed themselves or dress themselves or attend school or have friends or grow up to become anything other than beautiful broken bodies that require constant care until the day you put them in the ground. She'd accepted that reality because she'd had no choice. Acceptance had become survival, and survival had become the careful construction of routines and protocols and hired expertise. If she couldn't save her daughters, she could at least ensure they had the best possible care. The finest specialists, the most advanced equipment, round-the-clock nursing. Money couldn't fix everything, but it could build a fortress against hope, could create enough distance from the daily heartbreak that she could continue functioning. And then a janitor had walked into the room and everything she'd built had shattered with a single word. Eleanor closed the binder and stood. The clock on her desk read 4:32. In 90 minutes, Dr. Morrison would arrive for his scheduled weekly consultation. She should probably call him immediately, should describe what she'd witnessed, should begin the process of investigation and verification. But something held her back, an instinct she couldn't quite name, a reluctance to let the clinical machinery grind this moment into data and assessment protocols. She crossed to the window overlooking the back gardens. From here, she could see the elaborate playground equipment installed when the twins were 3. Custom-made, designed for children with limited mobility, incorporating therapeutic elements into every slide and swing. It had cost $80,000. The girls had used it exactly twice before Eleanor realized how it underscored everything they couldn't do, how every piece of adaptive equipment was another monument to loss. Now the playground sat empty, slowly weathering through seasons of rain. The swings moved slightly and the wind chains creaking with disuse. In the spring, the grass would grow tall around the bases and she'd have the groundskeeper cut it down and the cycle would repeat. Year after year, everything in its place, nothing changing. Except now, something had changed. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool glass. In her reflection, she could see the woman she'd become, 42 years old, still beautiful in that preserved way that required effort and expense but hollow. Andrew used to say she had light in her eyes, that when she smiled, it was like the sun coming out. She couldn't remember the last time she'd smiled that way. Couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything that didn't hurt. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chen opened the door without waiting for permission, carrying a tea service on a silver tray. "I thought you might need this, ma'am." "Thank you." Eleanor remained at the window as Mrs. Chen set the tray on the side table. The older woman hesitated, an unusual break in her perfect efficiency. "Mrs. Ashford, if I may, Jennifer just informed me of what happened in the care room." She paused, choosing words carefully. "It's quite remarkable. The girls have never vocalized like that before." "No," Eleanor's voice came out flat. "They haven't. The staff has noticed that they seem more alert when Mr. Winters is present." More engaged, Mrs. Chen's tone remained neutral, but Eleanor heard the implication underneath. "He has a way with them. He's a janitor." Eleanor turned from the window, schooling her expression into something approaching normal. "He's been here 3 weeks. He mops floors and empties trash. He's not a therapist." "Of course not, ma'am, Mrs." Chen straightened this tea service unnecessarily. Nevertheless, Jennifer mentioned that the girls track his movements, that they become calmer when he's in the room. She thought you should know, given this afternoon's development. Eleanor wanted to snap at her, wanted to shut down this line of conversation before it could go anywhere uncomfortable. But Mrs. Chen had earned the right to speak freely through 2 decades of loyal service, and beneath the housekeeper's professional demeanor was genuine concern. "What do you know about him, about Winters?" "Very little, ma'am." Mrs. Chen folded the napkin beside the teacup with precise corners. "He was hired through the usual agency, background check cleared. References from previous positions all checked out. He's quiet, keeps to himself, always punctual. Some of the staff mentioned he sometimes hums while he works, but nothing disruptive." Humming. Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. Andrew used to hum while he worked, used to fill the house with music without even realizing it. She'd banned music after he died, couldn't bear the reminder. Had anyone told Winters that rule? Where did he work before the agency would have those details? Mrs. Chen smoothed her uniform to tell that she had more to say, but was debating whether to voice it. "Would you like me to request his full file?" Eleanor should say yes. Should begin the process of investigating this man who'd somehow accomplished what millions of dollars and hundreds of hours of therapy couldn't. But another impulse pushed back, darker, more complicated. If she investigated too closely, she might find something that would require her to fire him. And if she fired him, would her daughters go back to silence? Not yet. Eleanor returned to her desk, dismissing Mrs. Chen with a gesture. "Thank you for the tea." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew, pulling the door shut with a soft click. Eleanor poured herself a cup, watched the steam rise and dissipate. The tea was Earl Grey, her usual afternoon blend. Mrs. Chen had added one sugar exactly as Eleanor preferred. Everything correct, everything controlled, except nothing was controlled anymore. Eleanor pulled out her phone and scrolled to Dr. Morrison's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. One touch would set everything in motion: medical assessments, neurological testing, speech evaluations. The machinery of expertise grinding forward, documenting and analyzing and attempting to understand. But something made her pause. If the specialists examined Ruby and Pearl now, they'd want to know what changed, what variable had been introduced. They'd isolate factors, control conditions, eliminate influences. And they'd see the way Eleanor had seen that the change wasn't a treatment protocol or a new medication or a therapeutic breakthrough. The change was a man in a cheap uniform who knelt on the floor and spoke to her daughters as if they understood every word. They'd study him, test him, try to bottle whatever he was doing and turn it into a reproducible method. And in the process, they'd destroy it. Because what Eleanor had witnessed in that care room wasn't a technique. It was something else. Something that couldn't be measured or replicated because it came from a place that doctors and therapists couldn't access us with their clipboards and assessment rubrics. It came from belief, pure and simple. Caleb Winters believed her daughters could speak, and so they spoke. Eleanor set down her phone. Dr. Morrison could wait until his scheduled appointment. She'd tell him then, let him witness it himself if it happened again. If. God, what if it didn't happen again? What if she'd witnessed a singular moment, a one-time neurological fluke that would never repeat? The thought sent ice through her veins. She'd spent 5 years learning to live without hope, and now hope had crashed back into her life with the force of a hurricane threatening to drown her. She drank her tea in silence, watching the afternoon light fade toward evening. Outside, the autumn wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the empty playground. The swings moved more vigorously, chains jingling with a sound that almost resembled music. At 5:15, Eleanor returned to the care room. Jennifer was preparing the girls for their evening routine, checking feeding tubes and adjusting positions. Ruby and Pearl both appeared drowsy, their eyes half-closed, faces slack. They looked exactly as they always did at this hour, small and fragile and fundamentally unreachable. How have they been? Eleanor kept her voice neutral, professional. Quiet since you left, ma'am. Jennifer smoothed Ruby's hair back from her forehead. They usually get sleepy around this time, especially after a big therapy day. And have they made any more sound? No, ma'am? Jennifer glanced toward the far door where Caleb had entered earlier. Not since Mr. Winters left. There it was, the confirmation Eleanor had been dreading. Without him in the room, they had gone silent again. Whatever connection had sparked this afternoon required his presence to sustain it. When does he typically clean this room? Usually late afternoon around 4. Jennifer consulted her watch. He should be back in about 20 minutes to do the final sweep before dinner service. Eleanor nodded and moved to the window, watching the garden sink into twilight. She could leave now, return to her office, maintain the careful distance she'd cultivated for 5 years. Or she could stay and see if it happened again. See if that moment of impossible connection could be repeated, or if she'd imagined the whole thing, if desperation had finally driven her to hallucination. I'll remain here until Dr. Morrison arrives. Eleanor settled into one of the comfortable chairs positioned against the wall, designed for parents who kept vigil beside their children. She couldn't remember the last time she'd actually used one. When will dinner be ready? 6:30 as usual. Jennifer seemed surprised by Eleanor's intention to stay, but was too professional to comment. Shall I have Mrs. Chen bring a tray here for you? No. I'll eat in the dining room later. They fell into silence. Eleanor watched her daughters, looking for any sign of the alertness she'd seen earlier. But Ruby and Pearl merely drowsed, their small chests rising and falling, with steady breaths, faces turned toward the darkening window. They could have been sleeping. They could have been anyone's children, beautiful and peaceful and perfectly normal. At 5:37, the far door opened. Caleb entered with his cleaning supplies bucket in one hand, mop in the other. He stopped. When he saw Eleanor, something flickering across his face, surprise, wariness, perhaps a trace of guilt. For a moment, neither of them moved. Mrs. Ashford, his voice was quiet, respectful. I didn't realize you were still here. I'm waiting for the doctor. Eleanor kept her tone neutral, giving nothing away. Please continue with your work. Caleb nodded and set down his bucket near the door, But instead of beginning the usual cleaning routine, he moved toward the girls' chairs. Jennifer stepped back, giving him space. Eleanor's pulse kicked up, adrenaline flooding her system without clear cause. She was simply watching a janitor approach her daughters. Nothing more. "Hey there, sweethearts." Caleb knelt between the chairs, his voice dropping to that same gentle murmur Eleanor had heard earlier. "Did you have a good rest?" Ruby's eyes opened. Not the slow, unfocused drift Eleanor usually saw, but a clear, deliberate opening that locked immediately onto Caleb's face. Across from her, Pearl stirred, turning her head with that same effortful intention. "That's my girls." Caleb smiled, and Eleanor saw something in that expression that made her chest ache. Not pity, not the careful, professional warmth of a therapist, just simple gladness, as if he genuinely enjoyed being near them. "You're both so pretty today. Did Nurse Jennifer tell you that you're both so beautiful?" "Dee." Ruby's voice was stronger than it had been earlier, the syllables more distinct. "I'm here, sweetheart." Caleb reached out and let his rough fingers rest against her small palm. "Daddy's right here." "Daddy," Pearl echoed, her voice thin but unmistakable. Eleanor gripped the arms of her chair. Jennifer had gone absolutely still, barely breathing. The room felt charged electric with a significance that Eleanor couldn't quite name. These were words, simple words, but the way her daughters spoke them, the way they looked at this man while forming the sounds, it was communication. Real, intentional communication. "That's right." Caleb's eyes shone again with that same moisture Eleanor had seen before. "You remember my voice, don't you? Both of you, such smart girls." He began to hum, just a quiet melody. Nothing Eleanor recognized, but the effect was immediate. Ruby's face softened, tension draining from her small shoulders. Pearl's eyes drifted half closed, but she kept her head turned toward Caleb, kept her attention focused on him. They were listening. After 5 years of specialists insisting they couldn't process complex auditory input, Eleanor's daughters were listening to a janitor hum while he cleaned their care room. The humming continued for perhaps 30 seconds before Caleb gradually let it fade. He gave each girl's hand a gentle squeeze, or as close to a squeeze as their limited response allowed, and stood. "I need to finish my work now, but I'll be back tomorrow. You both sleep well tonight, okay?" Caleb glanced at Jennifer. "Have a good evening, ma'am." "You too, Mr. Winters." Jennifer's voice came out, slightly strangled. Caleb retrieved his cleaning supplies and began the usual routine, emptying the small trash cans, wiping down surfaces, checking that the medical equipment storage was properly organized. He worked efficiently, methodically, but Eleanor noticed how his gaze kept returning to the girls, how he maintained awareness of them, even while focused on other tasks. The way a parent might work in the same room as their child, always partially attuned to their presence. When he'd finished, Caleb carried his supplies to the door. He paused there, turning back one final time. "Good night, Ruby. Good night, Pearl. See you tomorrow, Da." Ruby's response was soft, already drifting back towards sleep. "D." Pearl managed her eyes closed now, but her face turned toward his voice. Caleb smiled that same expression of simple gladness and left, pulling the door shut behind him. The silence that followed felt different than usual. Not empty, charged with possibility. Jennifer released a long breath. "My God," her voice shook slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, did you see I saw?" Eleanor stood, her legs steadier now. "Document everything. Time exact words, their responses. I want a complete record." "Yes, ma'am." Jennifer moved to the desk where she kept her nursing notes, hands trembling slightly as she picked up a pen. Eleanor crossed to Ruby's chair and looked down at her daughter. The little girl had drifted back into that pre-sleep state, face relaxed, breathing deep and even. Eleanor reached out an impulse she didn't examine too closely and touched Ruby's cheek with her fingertips. The skin was warm and soft, baby fine still despite 5 years. Her daughter, her child. Ruby didn't respond to the touch, didn't wake or focus or track Eleanor's movement. The moment had passed. Whatever connection had sparked when Caleb was present had faded with his departure, leaving only the familiar emptiness. Eleanor withdrew her hand and turned toward the door. "Jennifer informed me immediately if they vocalize again. Any sound at all. Call my cell phone regardless of the hour." "Of course, ma'am." Eleanor walked back to her office through hallways that suddenly felt different. The house was the same Persian runners, same artwork, same carefully maintained silence. But something had shifted in Eleanor's perception, as if she'd been looking at a photograph, and suddenly realized it was actually a window, and beyond the flat surface was depth and dimension she'd never noticed before. Morrison arrived at precisely 6 o'clock as he always did. 63 years old, chief of pediatric neurology at Seattle Children's Hospital, author of 2 textbooks on childhood neurological disorders. Eleanor had been paying him a consultation fee of $5,000 per visit for the past 4 years. He was worth every penny, even if he'd never been able to offer anything beyond careful management of expectations. Eleanor met him in the foyer. "Richard, thank you for coming, of course." He set down his leather bag and removed his overcoat, which Mrs. Chen collected with practiced efficiency. "How are the girls doing?" "That's what I need to discuss with you." Eleanor led him toward her office rather than the care room. "Can I offer you coffee, please?" Dr. Morrison settled into one of the leather chairs across from her desk while Mrs. Chen disappeared to retrieve refreshments. He pulled out a tablet, calling up his most recent notes. "I reviewed their latest PT and OT reports before coming over." The physical therapist noted some improvement in Pearl's head control, which is encouraging. Small gains but meaningful ones. There's been another development. Eleanor remained standing, pacing to the window and back. This afternoon, both girls vocalized, not reflexive sounds. Words. Dr. Morrison looked up sharply. "Words? Are you certain I heard them myself, multiple times?" Eleanor described the scene, keeping her voice clinical and precise. The word was daddy. Ruby said it clearly at least 3 times. Pearl twice. They were looking directly at the person they were addressing, tracking his movement with their eyes. The doctor set down his tablet. "Eleanor, you understand that what you're describing it contradicts everything we know about their condition. The level of oral motor control required for speech production, combined with the cognitive processing to select an appropriate word and direct it toward a specific person, I'm aware of what it should mean." Eleanor cut him off sharper than intended. "I'm telling you what I witnessed. Jennifer was there as well. She documented everything, Doctor." Morrison leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers together. Who were they addressing? A member of the janitorial staff. Eleanor kept her tone neutral. He was in the room cleaning. The girls appeared to focus on him, and then they spoke. "Interesting. The doctor's clinical mask was fully in place now, any surprise buried beneath professional detachment. And they've never shown this level of engagement before with any other staff member or family. No. How long has this janitor been working here? 3 weeks. And you've noticed changes in the girl's behavior during that time." Eleanor hesitated. She should say no, should deny any pattern, any connection. But Dr. Morrison had earned his fee through competence and discretion, and lying to him served no purpose. The nursing staff mentioned that Ruby and Pearl seem more alert when he's present, more engaged. I dismissed it as wishful thinking. But now you're reconsidering, Dictator. Morrison stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened gardens. "Eleanor, I need to examine the girls immediately. If they're truly demonstrating language acquisition, we need to document it thoroughly. Run additional neurological assessments, possibly adjust their treatment protocols." Mrs. Chen returned with a tray bearing coffee and small pastries. Dr. Morrison accepted a cup absently, his mind already spinning through diagnostic possibilities. Eleanor poured herself coffee she didn't want, grateful for the distraction of ritual. They're both drowsy right now. Evening is typically their least alert time. Eleanor sipped the too-hot coffee, feeling it burn down her throat. "If we wait until tomorrow morning, you'll have a better chance of witnessing. Tomorrow morning won't help me understand what happened this afternoon." De Morrison set down his cup with a decisive clink. "I need to see them tonight while the neurological event is still recent. Fresh observations are crucial. They've already been examined and prodded for hours today." Eleanor heard the edge in her own voice and didn't care. "Another session will exhaust them, Eleanor." The doctor's tone gentled. "If your daughters are developing speech capability, we need to understand how and why. This could change everything: their prognosis, their treatment plan, their quality of life. Surely you want answers as much as I do." Of course she wanted answers. She'd been desperate for answers for 5 years, had spent millions seeking them, had flown experts across oceans, and built an entire medical suite in her home in pursuit of them. But something made her resist Dr. Morrison's urgency, some instinct that told her clinical examination would destroy the fragile things she'd witnessed. "Tomorrow morning." Eleanor made it a command rather than a suggestion. "Come at 8 during their most alert period. Bring whatever equipment you need for a thorough assessment. But tonight they rest. Dr. Morrison studied her for a long moment, clearly surprised by the pushback. Very well. 8 o'clock tomorrow. He finished his coffee in 2 quick swallows and stood. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. If this is genuine language acquisition rather than coincidental vocalization, it represents a significant deviation from their established neurological baseline. We need to investigate causation, environmental factors, medication changes, new therapeutic interventions, any variable that might explain it. There haven't been any changes to their protocols. Eleanor walked him to the foyer where Mrs. Chen waited with his coat. Same medications, same therapy schedule, same routine, except for this janitor. Dr. Morrison shrugged into his overcoat. You said he's been here 3 weeks. That's when you started noticing behavioral changes. The nurses noticed, Eleanor corrected. I only confirmed it today. Nevertheless, the doctor retrieved his bag. I'll want to observe his interactions with the girls tomorrow. See for myself what's different about his approach. He's cleaning staff, Richard, not a therapist. Eleanor kept her voice level through force of will. Whatever you observed won't be replicable or sustainable. Perhaps, de Morrison paused at the door, or perhaps he's inadvertently stumbled onto something our therapeutic approaches have missed. Either way, we need to understand it. See you tomorrow at 8. He left. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Mrs. Chen appeared from the direction of the kitchen. Shall I prepare dinner, ma'am? Eleanor glanced at her watch. 6:45. Just a light salad. I'll eat in my office. She returned to her desk and tried to focus on the stack of contracts requiring her signature. A commercial development deal in Portland, a property acquisition in Vancouver, lease agreements for the new building downtown. Her attorney had flagged sections needing her attention, but the words blurred together, meaningless strings of legal language. All Eleanor could see was Ruby's face turning toward Caleb Pearl's labored effort to form a word. At 7:30, Mrs. Chen brought the salad. Eleanor picked at it without tasting, pushing arugula around her plate, while the windows darkened completely, turning into black mirrors that reflected the office back at her. Andrew's corner of the desk caught her eye, that bronze sailboat, that crystal paperweight. She'd kept his things exactly as he'd left them, a shrine to a ghost, a way of keeping him present without having to grieve him properly. What would Andrew make of all this? If he could somehow see what happened today, what would he say? Eleanor tried to imagine his voice, his reaction. Andrew had been the optimist in their marriage, the one who believed in second chances and happy endings and the fundamental goodness of people. Eleanor had loved that about him, even as she'd privately thought it naive. And then he died, and his optimism had died with him, and Eleanor had been left to raise their damaged daughters alone with nothing but realism to guide her, except maybe realism wasn't enough. Maybe she'd been so focused on managing expectations and avoiding hope that she'd stopped seeing her own children. At 8:15, Eleanor gave up on work. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, moving through the silent house toward her bedroom. The master suite occupied the entire west wing, 3,000 square feet of space designed for 2 people who would grow old together. Andrew's side of the walk-in closet still held his suits, his shoes, his collection of vintage watches. Eleanor hadn't been able to clear it out. Every few months, she'd think about calling an estate service, and then she'd walk past his things and lose her nerve. She changed into pajamas, silk expensive, utterly joyless, and went through her evening routine on autopilot. Cleanse, moisturize, brush teeth, take the small white pill that helped her sleep. The bathroom was marble and chrome cold and pristine. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman who'd aged 5 years in the span of 5 minutes this afternoon. A woman who'd been living half alive and hadn't realized it until her daughter said a single word. In bed, Eleanor lay staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sleeping pill to pull her under. The house settled around her with familiar creaks and saw. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the bare branches of the oaks. Seattle's autumn winds could be fierce, carrying the smell of rain and salt water from the sound. Andrew had loved the wind. Used to stand on the balcony with his arms spread wide, laughing like a child. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memories away. But tonight they came anyway. Andrew's laugh, Andrew's hands warm on her pregnant belly, Andrew humming while he assembled a crib that 2 babies would never use properly. They'd been so happy during her pregnancy, so convinced that everything would be perfect. Twin girls, Healthy scans, no complications until the very end, until something went wrong during delivery, until the doctors said words like oxygen deprivation and brain damage and permanent. And then Andrew had left for a business trip to Los Angeles routine just 3 days, and his plane had gone down in a storm over Oregon. 47 people dead in an instant. Eleanor had found out when a federal agent appeared at her door at 2 in the morning, had known before he even spoke what he was going to say. You carry that kind of news in your face in the way you can't meet someone's eyes. The sleeping pill pulled her down before she could follow the memory any further. She drifted into uneasy dreams where Ruby and Pearl were running through the empty playground, laughing and whole while Andrew pushed them on the swings. In the dream, Eleanor tried to reach them, but her feet wouldn't move, and she could only watch from the window of her cold, empty house. She woke at 3:17 suddenly and completely, her heart hammering. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard a faint sound from downstairs. Not quite crying, something else. Eleanor threw back the covers and grabbed her robe from the chair. Her feet were silent on the carpet as she moved through the dark hallway and down the stairs. The sound grew clearer as she descended, a soft, rhythmic humming. Music. The care room door stood open, golden lamplight spilling into the hall. Eleanor approached quietly, heart still racing from the abrupt wake-up. Inside, she found Jennifer asleep in one of the chairs, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, mouth slightly open. And beyond her, kneeling between Ruby and Pearl's cribs, was Caleb Winters. He wore street clothes, faded jeans, an old flannel shirt, and his hair was disheveled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. He held a small book in one hand, reading aloud in that same gentle murmur, while his other hand rested on Ruby's crib rail. The humming Eleanor had heard was coming from him, woven between the words of whatever story he was telling. Ruby and Pearl were both awake, both watching him with clear, focused attention. Not the usual blank stare or distant gaze. They were listening, engaged, present in a way Eleanor had never seen at 3 in the morning. She must have made some sound because Caleb looked up sharply, book freezing mid-sentence. His weathered face went pale, eyes widening with something that might have been fear. Mrs. Ashford, he stumbled over the words, clearly caught, completely off guard. I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't be here, but Jennifer called me and said the girls were restless, crying, and I thought maybe... He stopped, seeming to realize how this looked. A janitor in his employer's home at 3 in the morning reading to children who weren't his own. Eleanor should be furious, should fire him, immediately call security, have him escorted from the property. Instead, she found herself walking slowly into the room, tightening the belt of her robe. Jennifer called you. Eleanor kept her voice low, not wanting to wake the sleeping nurse. Yes, ma'am, around 2:30. Caleb set down the book carefully. She said they'd been crying for over an hour. Nothing would calm them. And she remembered that they seemed to respond to me earlier, so she thought that you could help. Eleanor completed the thought. She looked at her daughters, both now watching this exchange with that same unusual alertness. And did you... Yes, ma'am. Caleb's voice was barely above a whisper. They calmed down as soon as I started reading. What are you reading? Just an old children's book. Nothing special. He held it up so Eleanor could see the worn cover. I've had it since my daughter was born. I read it to her when she can't sleep. My daughter. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor filed them away, another piece of information about this man who'd somehow become essential to her children in the span of 3 weeks. She moved closer to the cribs, looking down at Ruby and Pearl. Their eyes tracked her movement, but didn't lock onto her face the way they did with Caleb. They knew she was their mother, she had to believe that, but they didn't connect with her. Didn't reach for her, even in the limited way they could reach. Mrs. Ashford, I'm sorry for overstepping. Caleb stood backing away from the cribs. I'll go now. I just wanted to make sure they were okay. Wait, the word came out sharper than Eleanor intended. She softened her tone. You said you have a daughter. Yes, ma'am. Caleb's posture had gone rigid, guarded. His rough hands curled into loose fists at his sides, a protective gesture. How old? 5. The same age as Ruby and Pearl. Eleanor processed this, wondering if it was coincidence or if it explained something about his ease with the twins. Does she live with you? Yes, ma'am. Just the 2 of us. Caleb's voice had gone flat, offering no more information than absolutely necessary. His weathered face revealed nothing, all the warmth and openness Eleanor had seen him display with the girls completely locked away. And where is she now? At home alone? No, ma'am. My neighbor watches her when I have to work odd hours. I called to check on her before coming over. She's fine. There was a story there Eleanor could tell. Something about why a single father would work as a janitor. Why he'd come running at 2 in the morning when a nurse called about children who weren't his own. Why he had an old children's book worn soft from years of reading. But pushing for more information felt wrong. Somehow invasive in a way Eleanor couldn't quite articulate. You can stay. Eleanor surprised herself with the offer, until they fall asleep. Then you should go home to your daughter. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, clearly trying to assess if this was some kind of test. Finally, he nodded. Thank you, ma'am. He settled back down on the floor between the cribs, picking up the book where he'd left off. His voice resumed that gentle cadence, telling a story about a bunny who couldn't sleep until his mother showed him how to count stars. Simple, rhythmic, hypnotic. Eleanor found herself sitting in the chair Jennifer had vacated. The nurse still slept on, oblivious in the other chair, and listening along with her daughters. The room had taken on a strange quality suspended outside normal time. The lamplight made everything soaked in golden shadows pooling in corners, the world beyond the windows absolutely dark. Caleb's voice continued steady and sure, anchoring the moment. Ruby's eyes began to drift closed. Pearl's head tilted slightly to one side, her breathing deepening. Eleanor watched Caleb as he read. His face had relaxed again, that guardedness falling away when he focused on the girls. There was something almost meditative about the way he read, not performing, not trying to entertain, just offering his presence and his voice as a gift. No wonder her daughters responded to him. He asked nothing of them, demanded no improvement or progress. He simply was with them, content to sit on the floor at 3 in the morning and read them a story about a sleepless bunny. The story ended. Caleb closed the book and sat in silence, watching Ruby and Pearl slide into sleep. When their breathing had evened out completely, he stood with careful quiet and moved toward the door. Eleanor rose and followed him into the hallway, pulling the door nearly closed behind them. Mr. Winters, Eleanor kept her voice low, I want to understand what you're doing with my daughters. Ma'am? He looked genuinely confused. I'm not doing anything special. Just reading, talking to them. Same as I do with my own girl. But they respond to you. Eleanor struggled to find the right words. They speak to you. After 5 years of silence, they suddenly develop language because you walk into a room. That's not nothing. Caleb shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise or the attention. I think maybe they just needed someone who believes they can, ma'am. Kids are smart. They know when adults have given up on them. The words landed like a physical blow. Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't respond. Is that what you think I've done? Given up on them? No, ma'am. Caleb's voice was gentle without judgment. I think you've been hurting so much that you had to protect yourself somehow. But kids need to be believed in. Need to know someone thinks they can do things even when it seems impossible. Eleanor looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Down the hallway, she could see the music room doorway, Andrew's piano covered and silent. I've given them everything. The best doctors, the best therapists, the best equipment money can buy. I know, ma'am, and that matters. But sometimes Caleb paused, choosing words carefully. Sometimes what they need most isn't equipment or expertise. It's just someone sitting with them on the floor, talking to them like they understand every word. And you think they do. Understand? Yes, ma'am. I do. Eleanor finally looked back at him. Why are you working as a janitor if you're so good with children? Something flickered across Caleb's face, pain, maybe a regret. That's a long story, ma'am. And it's very late. I should get back to my daughter. Eleanor nodded and stepped aside, letting him pass. He made it 3 steps down the hallway before she spoke again. Mr. Winters, thank you. For tonight. He turned back, offering a small, tired smile. Anytime, ma'am. For those girls, anytime. Then he was gone, footsteps fading toward the back entrance. Eleanor stood alone in the dim hallway, listening to the house settle around her. Through the partially open door, she could hear Jennifer stirring, waking from her uncomfortable nap. Eleanor should go inside, should have a conversation with her nurse about appropriate boundaries and calling staff members in the middle of the night. But she couldn't bring herself to discipline Jennifer for doing the one thing that had actually helped. Instead, Eleanor returned to her bedroom and lay in the darkness, watching the digital clock tick toward morning. Sleep wouldn't come again. Her mind kept circling back to Caleb's words. Sometimes what they need most is just someone sitting with them on the floor. How long had it been since Eleanor had sat on the floor with her daughters, not standing over them while therapists worked, not observing from across the room, while nurses tended to their needs, but actually sitting with them at their level, present and engaged? She tried to remember and couldn't. At some point during the long nightmare of the past 5 years, she'd stopped being a mother and become a manager. Scheduling of appointments, paying bills, making decisions, but never just being with Ruby and Pearl in any meaningful way. She told herself it was necessary, that someone had to handle the logistics, coordinate the care, maintain the structure, that her daughters needed medical expertise more than they needed her company. But maybe that was the lie she'd told herself to justify the distance, to protect herself from the constant breaking of hope that came with loving children who couldn't love her back. Except they could love. She'd seen it in their faces when they looked at Caleb. They could connect and respond and engage. She'd just stopped believing they could, and so they'd stop trying with her. At 6:30, Eleanor gave up on sleep entirely. She showered, dressed in her usual work attire, tailored pants, silk blouse, cashmere cardigan, and went downstairs. Mrs. Chen was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast and organizing the day's meals. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, rich and dark. "Morning, ma'am." Mrs. Chen poured a cup without being asked. Dr. Morrison confirmed for 8 o'clock. "I've prepared the care room for his examination." "Thank you." Eleanor accepted the coffee and moved to the windows overlooking the back garden. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold. The empty playground stood in silhouette swings, moving slightly in the morning breeze. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. "If I may, ma'am, Jennifer mentioned it that Mr. Winters was here last night. She wanted me to inform you that she takes full responsibility for calling him without your permission. She was afraid you'd be upset." "And am I?" Eleanor didn't turn from the window. "Upset?" The housekeeper was quiet for a moment. "I don't believe so, ma'am. But perhaps you're not entirely sure yet." "Perhaps not." Eleanor sipped her coffee, feeling the caffeine start to work on her exhausted system. "Mrs. Chen, what do you know about Mr. Winters beyond what's in his employment file?" "Not much, ma'am. The other staff say he's very quiet. Sometimes he brings lunch and eats alone in the garden rather than the staff room." Mrs. Chen began laying out breakfast dishes with precise efficiency. Anna from housekeeping mentioned he keeps a photo in his locker. "A little girl, his daughter." "Yes, ma'am." Anna said he looks at it every day before starting work like a ritual. Eleanor turned that information over in her mind. A single father working multiple jobs based on the references Mrs. Chen had mentioned yesterday, carrying a photo he consulted like a talisman, building his life around a daughter who needed him. The parallel to her own situation was obvious and uncomfortable. "I want his complete employment file on my desk this morning." Eleanor made the decision quickly before she could second-guess it. Everything, previous positions, references, background check, all of it. Mrs. Chen nodded. "I'll request it from the agency immediately." By 7:45, Eleanor had received and reviewed Caleb Winter's file. It arrived as a thick PDF attachment, and she read it at her desk while picking at the breakfast Mrs. Chen had insisted she eat. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, fresh fruit. Eleanor tasted none of it. The file was thorough. Caleb Winters, age 38, born in Spokane, Washington. High school graduate, some community college, but no degree. Previous employment showed a pattern custodial work at medical facilities, specifically those serving children. Seattle Children's Hospital, Evergreen Pediatric Rehabilitation Center, Redmond Heights Senior Living Facility. The references were glowing. Reliable, hardworking, excellent with patience. One supervisor had written, "Caleb has a gift with the children. They respond to him in ways they don't with our trained therapists. He's patient, gentle, and genuinely seems to care about their well-being." Eleanor's fingers paused over the trackpad. This had been noted before, at other facilities. His ability to connect with children who struggled to connect with anyone else. So why was he working as a janitor in her house rather than pursuing a career in therapy or special education? She scrolled to the personal information section. Marital status: divorced. Custody: primary physical custody of minor child. And then she found a note from the background check marked discretionary disclosure. Subject has a dependent child with special medical needs. May require flexible scheduling or occasional family emergency leave. Eleanor clicked through to the attached documentation. There was a medical release form signed by Caleb authorizing the agency to view basic health information about his daughter for employment purposes. The summary was brief but devastating. Daisy Winters, age 5. Diagnosis: spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy severe. Nonverbal, requires full assistance with all activities of daily living. Current care plan includes physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, regular medical monitoring. Eleanor's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, clearing her eyes, and read the paragraph again. Caleb's daughter had the same condition as Ruby and Pearl, the same diagnosis, the same limitations, the same profound challenges. He wasn't just some janitor with a knack for kids. He was a father living the same nightmare Eleanor lived every day. And somehow, despite that, or maybe because of it, he'd maintained his belief that these children could grow and learn and connect. He'd spent years working in facilities where he'd seen hundreds of kids like his daughter, like Ruby and Pearl. He'd watched them progress or not progress, seen the best and worst that medical science could offer. And he still believed. Eleanor closed the laptop and pressed both hands over her face. Behind her closed eyes, she saw Caleb kneeling on the floor at 3 in the morning, reading to her daughters with the same gentle patience he probably used with his own child. A man who cleaned floors for a living because it let him work around his daughter's care schedule, because it kept him close to the kinds of kids who needed him, because he'd found his purpose in the spaces between clinical expertise and parental love. At precisely 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dr. Morrison had arrived with his equipment and his expertise ready to examine Ruby and Pearl and document their miraculous speech development. Eleanor stood and straightened her cardigan, preparing to face another round of medical assessment. But this time something was different. This time she had information the doctor didn't. This time she understood that what was happening in her care room wasn't a neurological anomaly to be studied and measured. It was something far simpler and far more profound. It was one broken person reaching across the void to connect with 2 others. It was belief in the face of impossible odds. It was the kind of love that didn't need a medical degree or a therapeutic protocol because it came from living in the trenches, from understanding suffering, not as an abstract problem to solve, but as a daily reality to navigate. Eleanor met Dr. Morrison in the foyer, shook his hand, accepted his professional greeting. But as she led him toward the care room, she made a decision. She wouldn't tell him about Caleb's daughter, wouldn't give him that information to analyze and theorize about, because some things were sacred even in the midst of scientific inquiry, especially in the midst of it. The girls were awake and alert when they entered the care room. Jennifer had them positioned for optimal assessment, properly supported. Faces, clean hair, brushed. They looked beautiful and fragile, and exactly like the children described in Dr. Morrison's clinical notes. "Good morning, ladies." The doctor set down his bag and pulled out various instruments, lights, reflexes, hammers, recording equipment. "Shall we see if we can get them to vocalize again?" Eleanor positioned herself against the wall, watching. Dr. Morrison was thorough and professional, trying multiple approaches to engage the girls. He spoke to them directly, showed them colorful objects, made exaggerated facial expressions. Ruby and Pearl watched him with their usual vague attention eyes, drifting faces neutral. They might have been looking at a ceiling fan or a blank wall for all the engagement they showed. After 15 minutes, Dr. Morrison sat back, frowning slightly. "They're quite subdued this morning. Are they always this low energy during their alert period?" "Sometimes." Eleanor kept her voice neutral. "They have good days and difficult days. Can you describe exactly what you witnessed yesterday?" The doctor pulled out his tablet. "What was the janitor doing when they vocalized he was cleaning?" "He just entered the room." Eleanor picked her words carefully. "He greeted them, spoke to them briefly, and they responded." "And you said he hummed?" Dr. Morrison made notes. "What melody? I don't know. Something simple." Eleanor watched her daughters staring past Dr. Morrison's expensive equipment, past his Yale medical degree, and decades of expertise toward the far door where Caleb usually entered. The doctor spent another 30 minutes running through various assessment protocols. Ruby and Pearl tolerated it with their usual passive compliance, neither engaged nor distressed. Finally, Dr. Morrison packed up his equipment, clearly disappointed. "I'd like to return this afternoon when this janitor is here." Dr. Morrison removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "If his presence is the variable that triggers vocalization, I need to observe it directly. He'll be here at 4. Eleanor walked the doctor to the door. But Richard, I want you to understand something. He's not performing a therapeutic intervention. He's just being himself. Nevertheless, the doctor retrieved his coat. If he can reliably induce language production in children with this level of impairment, we need to understand his methods. This could be groundbreaking, Eleanor. It could change how we approach nonverbal children entirely. Or it could just be two little girls responding to someone who believes in them. Eleanor opened the door, indicating the conversation was over. See you at 4. After Dr. Morrison left, Eleanor returned to the care room. Jennifer had gone to prepare the girls' mid-morning feeding, leaving Eleanor alone with her daughters for the first time in longer than she could remember. She pulled a chair close to the cribs and sat studying their small faces. Ruby had Andrew's nose, that same slight upward tilt at the tip. Pearl had inherited Eleanor's eye shape, wide set and slightly tilted at the outer corners. Their hair was brown like Andrew's, fine and soft, curling slightly at the ends. Beautiful children, broken children, her children. Eleanor reached out and took Ruby's hand in hers. The small fingers were limp and warm, incapable of grasping back. I'm sorry. The words came out before Eleanor could stop them. I'm sorry I haven't been here. I'm sorry I've been so afraid. Ruby's eyes drifted toward Eleanor's face, not quite focusing, but closer than usual. Eleanor squeezed the small hand gently. Your father would be so disappointed in me. He believed you were perfect, no matter what the doctor said. I wish I'd been able to keep believing that. Eleanor's throat tightened. But I'm going to try now. I'm going to try to see you the way he did, the way Caleb does. She sat there for another 10 minutes, just holding Ruby's hand and watching her daughters breathe. It wasn't transformative. Ruby and Pearl didn't suddenly smile or vocalize or demonstrate miraculous development, but something shifted anyway, something in Eleanor, a small crack in the protective shell she'd built around her heart. Not breaking it open entirely, not yet, just letting a small amount of light through. When Jennifer returned with feeding supplies, Eleanor stood and moved toward the door. Then she paused, turning back. Jennifer, when Mr. Winters arrives this afternoon, please ask him to come to my office first, before he begins his usual routine. The nurse looked surprised. Of course, ma'am. Is everything all right? Eleanor considered the question. Everything had been wrong for 5 years, and she'd learned to call it normal. Now something was shifting, and she had no idea if that was all right or if it would hurt even more than the careful numbness she'd cultivated. I just need to speak with him. Eleanor left before Jennifer could ask anything else. She returned to her office and tried to work. Contracts, emails, phone calls with her property managers and attorneys. The machinery of wealth maintenance, the constant decisions required to preserve and grow a fortune. Eleanor had always been good at this, had built her father's modest real estate business into an empire that spanned the Pacific Northwest. Andrew used to joke that she had ice water in her veins when it came to negotiations, that she could stare down anyone across a conference table. But the ice was melting now, and Eleanor found herself unable to focus on lease agreements when all she could think about was the look on Caleb's face when Ruby said Daddy. That mixture of joy and sorrow and profound tenderness. The way his rough hands had trembled slightly as he rested them on the girl's armrests. The quiet crack in his voice when he'd said, That's my girl. At 3:45, Eleanor heard voices in the hallway. Mrs. Chen was speaking with someone, her professional tone indicating an arrival. Eleanor stood and smoothed her cardigan, suddenly nervous in a way she couldn't name. The knock on her office door came a moment later. Come in. Caleb entered, still wearing his janitor's uniform work gloves, stuffed in one pocket. He looked uncertain, standing just inside the doorway, as if ready to bolt at any moment. His weathered face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. You wanted to see me, ma'am? Yes. Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please sit. He did, perching on the edge of the seat with the kind of discomfort that suggested he wasn't used to being invited into employers' offices. Eleanor returned to her own chair, suddenly unsure how to begin this conversation. Mr. Winters, I received your employment file this morning. Eleanor decided directness was best. I know about your daughter. Caleb went very still. His jaw tightened slightly, and his rough hands curled into loose fists on his thighs. That's not something I advertise, ma'am. I understand why. Eleanor kept her voice gentle. But it helps me understand what's happening with Ruby and Pearl. You're not just a janitor with a knack for children. You're a father who lives with the same challenges I face every day. Caleb looked down at his hands. Daisy's a little different from your girls, ma'am. Her condition is more severe. She can't vocalize at all, can barely move. But yes, I understand what you're going through. Better than most people could. Is that why you took this job? Because you wanted to be around other children like her? Partly, Caleb's voice was quiet. I've worked at a lot of facilities over the years. Hospitals, rehab centers, nursing homes, anywhere they had kids who needed extra care. It helps me somehow, seeing other families dealing with the same struggles, knowing Daisy and I aren't alone. And what about your own treatment for Daisy? Physical therapy, speech therapy, all the interventions Ruby and Pearl receive. We can't afford most of that. Caleb's voice remained steady, stating facts without self-pity. Her insurance covers some basic care, but nothing like what you can provide for your girls. I do what I can at home exercises I've learned from therapists stretching positioning. But professional therapy sessions, specialized equipment. That's not in our budget. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. I had no idea. No reason you would, ma'am. Caleb met her eyes directly. I'm not telling you this, looking for sympathy or help. I just want you to understand that when I work with Ruby and Pearl, I'm not doing therapy or following some method. I'm just treating them the way I treat Daisy. Like they're complete people who deserve dignity and belief even if they can't show progress the way doctors want them to. The words settled between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Eleanor thought about the millions she'd spent on her daughter's care, about the suite of medical equipment and the team of specialists. Then she thought about Caleb caring for his daughter alone, with whatever knowledge he could glean from watching professionals work with nothing but his own determination and love to guide him. Dr. Morrison is coming back at 4. Eleanor shifted in her chair. He wants to observe your interaction with the girls, see if he can understand why they vocalize with you. Caleb's expression closed down immediately. I'm not comfortable with that, ma'am. Why not? Because he's going to try to turn it into a technique, something replicable and measurable. And it's not. Caleb leaned forward slightly, intensity breaking through his usual careful neutrality. Ruby and Pearl talk to me because I don't expect anything from them, because I'm not trying to fix them or change them. I just sit with them and treat them like they understand everything I say. The minute someone starts studying that and trying to reproduce it clinically, it stops being real connection and becomes just another therapy protocol. Eleanor understood what he meant, had felt the same resistance when Dr. Morrison started talking about groundbreaking research. So what do you suggest I tell him? Tell him the truth, Caleb settled back in his chair, that your daughters are responding to consistent care from someone who believes in them, that it's not about specific techniques or interventions, that it's just about being present and patient and refusing to give up on them. He won't accept that. Eleanor smiled slightly. Doctors need something they can quantify and reproduce. Then let him try. Caleb shrugged. But don't be surprised when Ruby and Pearl go silent again the minute he starts running assessment protocols. Eleanor checked the clock on her desk, 3:57. Morrison would be arriving any moment. She stood, decision made. Come with me to the care room. But Mr. Winters, she paused at the door, turning back to face him. Don't change what you do just because he's watching. Just be yourself with them. Caleb nodded and followed her down the hallway. They found Dr. Morrison already in the care room, setting up video equipment on a tripod. He looked up when Eleanor entered, his expression shifting to keen interest when he saw Caleb behind her. Ah, you must be Mr. Winters. Dr. Morrison extended his hand. Richard Morrison. I'm the girl's neurologist. Caleb shook his hand briefly. Nice to meet you, sir. I understand you've been having remarkable success in engaging with Ruby and Pearl. The doctor gestured toward his equipment. I'd like to document that if you don't mind. Just proceed with whatever you normally do. Caleb glanced at Eleanor, something questioning in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving permission. He moved past Dr. Morrison's cameras and equipment, past Jennifer, arranging supplies, past all the medical trappings, and knelt on the floor between the girls' cribs. Hey there, sweethearts. His voice immediately took on that gentle quality Eleanor had learned to recognize. Sorry I'm late today. Did you miss me? For several seconds, nothing happened. Ruby and Pearl looked at Caleb with their usual vague attention, eyes drifting. Dr. Morrison adjusted his camera angle, making a soft sound of interest. Eleanor held her breath. Then Ruby's gaze sharpened, locked onto Caleb's face with sudden focus. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The muscles in her jaw worked with visible effort. Da. The syllable was soft but unmistakable. That's my girl. Caleb's voice cracked slightly. I'm here. D, Pearl echoed from her crib head, turning toward Caleb with that same labored intention. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, transfixed. The video camera whirred softly, recording everything. Eleanor found herself gripping the back of Jennifer's chair, knuckles white. Caleb began to hum that same simple melody Eleanor had heard before. The girls' faces softened, tension draining from their small bodies. Ruby made another sound, not quite a word, but something close. Pearl's fingers twitched against her blanket, the closest she could come to reaching out. Tell me about your day. Caleb kept his voice low and steady. Did you have good therapy sessions? I bet you were both so brave at the UIU. He continued talking to them, asking questions, and then answering himself, maintaining a one-sided conversation that somehow didn't feel empty or performative. Dr. Morrison watched with absolute concentration, occasionally making notes on his tablet, but mostly just observing. After 20 minutes, Caleb stood and stepped back. That's all I usually do, Doc. Nothing special. Just talk to them like they're listening because I believe they are. Remarkable, Doctor. Morrison replayed footage on his camera. Absolutely remarkable. The level of engagement, the clear intentionality in their vocalizations, it's unlike anything I've seen in children with their degree of impairment. With respect, Sir Caleb's voice remained polite but firm. Maybe the impairment isn't where everyone keeps looking for it. The doctor looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, maybe Ruby and Pearl have been capable of this all along, but nobody gave them a reason to try. Caleb met Dr. Morrison's gaze steadily. Kids know when adults have written them off, when everyone around them is just going through therapeutic motions without really believing anything will change. Why would they bother trying to communicate if they sense nobody actually expects them to? Dr. Morrison's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, consideration, defensive, resistance. Mr. Winters, I appreciate your connection with these children, but I think you're oversimplifying. Complex neurological. I'm not a doctor. Caleb cut in gently. I'm just a father who spent 5 years learning that belief matters as much as medical intervention. Maybe more. Eleanor found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. Richard, Mr. Winters, has a daughter with cerebral palsy, severe spastic quadriplegia, nonverbal. He understands these conditions from personal experience. The doctor's expression shifted to something more guarded. I see. He began packing up his equipment with brisk efficiency. Well, regardless of the underlying mechanism, I'd like to continue monitoring Ruby and Pearl's progress. I'll want weekly assessments moving forward, a documentation of any new vocalizations or behavioral changes. Of course! Eleanor moved toward the door, dismissing him without explicitly asking him to leave. Thank you for coming, Richard. Dur. Morrison left the care room, fell into quiet. Jennifer busied herself with routine tasks, organizing supplies, and checking the girls' positioning. Caleb remained standing near the cribs, watching Ruby and Pearl with soft eyes. Mr. Winters, Eleanor approached him. I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Yes, ma'am. Do you believe my daughters can get better, not just make sounds, but truly develop language? Walk, live independently. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he spoke, his voice low enough that only Eleanor could hear. I don't know, ma'am. I'm not qualified to make predictions about their medical future, but I believe they can grow and learn and connect in ways the doctors say they can't. I believe they understand more than anyone gives them credit for. And I believe that if we keep showing up for them, keep believing in them, they'll find ways to show us what they're capable of. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. That's not a medical answer. No, ma'am, it's not. Caleb smiled slightly. It's a father's answer. It's what I tell myself about Daisy every morning when I wake up and face another day of caring for a child who might never improve. Because the alternative is giving up, and I can't do that to her. And you can't do it to Ruby and Pearl. I haven't given up. The words came out defensive, sharp. No, ma'am, Caleb's voice remained gentle. You've just protected yourself so well that it looks the same from the outside. But there's a difference, and I think you're starting to remember what that difference feels like. He was right, and Eleanor knew it. The crack in her protective shell had widened during the past 30 hours, letting in not just light but also pain, the sharp, terrible pain of allowing herself to hope again after years of carefully managed expectations. You should go home to your daughter. Eleanor's voice came out rougher than intended. It's late, and I'm sure she's waiting for you. Caleb nodded and moved toward the door, but he paused in the threshold, turning back one more time. Mrs. Ashford, if it helps, my Daisy can't speak, can't move much, might never progress beyond her current state. But she's still the best thing in my life. Every morning when I help her through her care routine, every night when I read to her before bed, I feel grateful that she exists. Not because of what she might become, but because of who she is right now. He left. Eleanor stood alone in the care room. Jennifer had quietly slipped out during their conversation and looked at her sleeping daughters. Caleb's words echoed in her mind, grateful that she exists. When was the last time Eleanor had felt grateful for Ruby and Pearl's existence? Not guilty or heartbroken or grimly determined to provide the best care. Actually grateful in a way that celebrated their presence, rather than mourning their limitations. She couldn't remember. That realization hurt more than anything else that had happened in the past 48 hours. Eleanor pulled a chair close to the cribs and sat down. Really sat, committing to being present rather than just passing through on her way to something else. She reached out and took one of Ruby's hands in her right, one of Pearl's in her left. The small fingers were warm and limp and utterly trusting. I'm here, Eleanor whispered the words into the quiet room. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I'm here now, and I'm going to try to be the mother your father believed I could be. The mother you deserve, Deshaun. Neither girl stirred. They slept on, peaceful and oblivious to their mother's breakdown. But Eleanor sat there holding their hands until Jennifer returned at 6 to begin the evening care routine. And when she finally released their fingers and stood to go, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Not hope exactly, nothing that optimistic or naive, but perhaps the precursor to hope, the willingness to keep showing up, to keep trying to remain present, even when presence hurt. Caleb was right. That was what her daughters needed most. Not more therapy or better equipment or different specialists. They needed their mother to believe they were worth the pain of loving them. The following week passed in a strange, suspended state, each day, bleeding into the next with a quality Eleanor couldn't name. She found herself drawn to the care room at odd hours, not to manage or supervise, but simply to observe. Watching Caleb work with Ruby and Pearl had become something between compulsion and meditation, a window into a version of motherhood she'd abandoned 5 years ago. Thursday afternoon found her standing in the hallway outside the care room, partially concealed behind the doorframe. Inside, Caleb knelt between the cribs, holding that worn children's book she'd seen before. His voice carried through the quiet space, reading about a caterpillar who became a butterfly. Ridiculous metaphor, Eleanor thought. But Ruby and Pearl watched him with focused attention, their eyes tracking his face, mouths occasionally working to form sounds they couldn't quite produce. When Caleb finished reading, he began to hum. Eleanor had heard him hum before, but this time something caught her attention, a familiarity in the melody that made her skin prickle. She knew that tune. Knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat knew it from late nights, when Andrew would stand at the nursery door, humming to 2 babies he believed would grow up healthy and whole. Eleanor's hand went to her throat. Her breath stopped mid-inhale. That was Andrew's song, the lullaby he'd composed himself during her pregnancy, the one he'd sung every night until the plane crash stole him from existence. She'd never written it down, never recorded it, never taught it to anyone. So how was Caleb Winters humming it with perfect accuracy in her care room? She must have made a sound because Caleb looked up, stopping mid-melody. His weathered face registered awareness of her presence, but no guilt. No surprise at being caught. Mrs. Ashford. His voice remained soft, respectful. I didn't hear you approach. Eleanor stepped into the room fully, her legs carrying her forward on pure instinct. Where did you learn that song, ma'am? Caleb stood, setting the book aside carefully. That melody, the one you were humming? Eleanor's voice had gone sharp, despite her best efforts to control it. Where did it come from? Caleb glanced toward the cabinets lining the far wall. I found something a few weeks ago when I was deep cleaning behind the storage units. A notebook. It had fallen back there maybe years ago. I thought you'd want it returned, but he hesitated, choosing words carefully. It seemed private, and the girls responded to the songs inside, so I kept using them. I should have asked permission. I'm sorry, show me. The command came out harder than Eleanor intended. Show me this notebook. Caleb moved to his supply cart and retrieved something from the lower shelf. When he handed it to Eleanor, her knees went weak. Brown leather worn soft at the corners, filled with Andrew's distinctive slanted handwriting. She knew this notebook, had thought it lost in the chaos after his death, after the funeral, after the long nightmare of settling his estate while caring for two critically ill infants. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages contained what Andrew had called his dad notes ideas for raising children, recipes he wanted to try, stories he planned to tell. And there near the middle of the book, a section titled Songs for When I'm Not Here Anymore. The floor tilted sideways. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the nearest crib for support, the notebook clutched against her chest. Andrew had known. Somehow, in those final weeks before the plane crash, he'd known he wouldn't be there to sing to his daughters. Had written down the melodies, the words, instructions for lullabies he'd never get to perform. "Mrs. Ashford, are you all right?" Caleb's voice came from somewhere distant. "Should I call someone?" "Get out." Eleanor couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see this stranger holding knowledge of her dead husband, this janitor who'd somehow become more connected to her daughters in 3 weeks than she'd been in 5 years. "Just leave, ma'am. I didn't mean to out. Now." Caleb left without another word. Eleanor heard the door close softly, heard Jennifer rustling in the corner, pretending she hadn't witnessed this exchange. Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, Andrew's notebook open on her lap, and read, "For Ruby and Pearl when they can't sleep." Andrew's handwriting blurred through her tears. "These are the songs I sang to them before they were born, the melodies I hummed while their mother carried them inside her. If I'm not there to sing them myself, I hope someone else will. Children need music. They need to know the world can be gentle." The next page contained the lullaby Caleb had been humming, written out with careful notation marks Andrew had invented himself. Below it, another song, then another. 6 lullabies total, each with notes about when to use them, what mood they were meant to create. The last entry stopped Eleanor's heart completely. "If Eleanor is reading this, it means something happened to me. Don't let her close herself off. She's so strong, but strength can become a cage if she's not careful. She'll want to protect herself by building walls, by turning love into logistics. Don't let her. Our daughters need her heart, not just her efficiency. And Elle, if you're reading this, remember that loving them doesn't mean fixing them. It means seeing them exactly as they are and choosing joy anyway. You can do this. You're braver than you believe." Eleanor pressed both hands over her mouth to muffle the sound trying to escape. Sobs or screams or some combination, she couldn't tell. Jennifer appeared beside her with a box of tissues, placed them wordlessly on the armrest, and retreated. Professional discretion preventing her from witnessing more of her employer's breakdown than absolutely necessary. For 20 minutes, Eleanor sat with Andrew's final message, reading his words again and again, until they burned themselves into her consciousness. He'd known her so well, known exactly how she'd respond to tragedy, how she'd retreat into control and management, because feeling everything would destroy her. And he tried to warn her, tried to leave instructions for staying human in the face of unbearable loss. But she'd failed anyway. Had become exactly what Andrew feared, strong and distant, and so carefully protected that she'd forgotten how to be anyone's mother. Caleb had found this notebook, had read these private words, these intimate messages from a dead man to his daughters. And instead of returning it immediately, instead of respecting the privacy of grief, he'd used the songs. Had taken Andrew's lullabies and sung them himself as if he had any right to stand in a dead man's place. Eleanor's hands clenched around the notebook, anger rising hot and sharp. Who was Caleb Winters to decide what her daughters needed? Who was he to step into the void? Andrew left and act like he belonged there. A janitor with a tragic backstory didn't earn the right to replace a father, didn't get to claim intimacy with children who weren't his own. But even as the fury built, another voice whispered underneath. Caleb hadn't replaced Andrew. He'd simply done what Andrew asked, kept the music alive, refused to let Eleanor's grief silence the house completely. The girls responded to those lullabies because they'd heard them in the womb, had some cellular memory of their father's love translated through melody. Caleb was just the instrument. Andrew's love was what reached them. The anger drained as quickly as it had risen, leaving Eleanor hollow. She closed the notebook and pressed it against her heart, feeling the worn leather warm under her palms. Then she stood steady to herself and left the care room. She had work to do. In her office, Eleanor opened her laptop and composed an email to Caleb Winters. Professional, measured. She typed 3 different versions before settling on one that didn't reveal how undone she felt. Mr. Winters, Thank you for preserving my husband's notebook and for using his songs with Ruby and Pearl. I understand now why they respond to your presence. You've given them something I couldn't, their father's voice, even if filtered through a stranger. I'm grateful, though I'm not ready to say that to your face yet. Please continue your work with them. They need you. Eleanor Ashford. She hit send before she could reconsider. Then she pulled up the security footage from the care room, rewinding to earlier that afternoon. Watched Caleb reading to her daughters, humming Andrew's lullabies, treating them with a tenderness Eleanor had forgotten how to access. The man on the screen wasn't trying to replace anyone. He was just showing up day after day, believing in two little girls everyone else had written off. The phone on her desk buzzed. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Ashford, Dr. Morrison is online too. He says it's urgent." Eleanor picked up with a sense of foreboding. "Richard." "What is it, Eleanor? I need to speak with you about Mr. Winters." The doctor's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "I've done some investigating into his background, his methods, his previous employment. What I've found is deeply concerning." "I'm listening." Eleanor kept her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "He's been fired from two previous positions, Seattle Children's and Evergreen Rehab." Dr. Morrison spoke with the crisp authority of someone delivering a diagnosis. Both times for the same reason. He became too emotionally involved with pediatric patients, crossed professional boundaries. Parents complained. Facilities couldn't risk the liability. What kind of boundaries? Eleanor's hand tightened around the phone. Spending personal time with patients outside work hours. Bringing his own child to the facility. Making promises about outcomes he couldn't guarantee. The doctor paused for emphasis. "Eleanor, I know you've seen positive results with Ruby and Pearl, but this man has a pattern of destabilizing therapeutic environments. He means well, but good intentions don't excuse inappropriate conduct." "Did he harm any children?" Eleanor cut through the implications. "Was there abuse? Neglect, anything that put kids in danger?" "Not physically, no, but emotional harm is still harm." Dr. Morrison's voice softened slightly. "He raises false hope in families who are already vulnerable. He makes parents believe their children can achieve things that medical reality won't support. And when those miracles don't materialize, the families are left more devastated than before." Or maybe, Eleanor said slowly, he helps children progress beyond what limited medical imagination allows. Maybe he was fired because he made doctors uncomfortable by proving their prognoses wrong. Silence on the other end. Then Dr. Morrison spoke with careful patience. "Eleanor, I understand you're experiencing hope for the first time in years. That's natural, but you can't let it cloud your judgment. This man is not a miracle worker. He's an untrained custodian with a savior complex and a tragic backstory that makes him sympathetic. Don't confuse sympathy with wisdom." The words landed like physical blows, each one carefully aimed at Eleanor's most vulnerable places. She thought of Caleb reading to Ruby and Pearl at 3 in the morning, thought of him humming Andrew's lullabies with such care, thought of the way her daughters' faces lit up when he entered the room. "Thank you for your concern, Richard." Eleanor made her voice pleasant and dismissive simultaneously. "I'll take it under advisement." "Was there anything else?" "Yes, actually." De Morrison shifted into his other concern. "I received a call yesterday from Gerald Hutchinson. He's worried about you." "Gerald?" Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Gerald Hutchinson served on the board of Ashford Properties, had been her father's best friend, had known Eleanor since childhood. He was also the most conservative member of the board, constantly pushing for safe investments and predictable returns. "What did Gerald want?" "He mentioned that you've been missing meetings, not responding to emails in a timely manner. He's concerned you're not maintaining appropriate focus on the company." The doctor's voice took on a therapeutic quality. "Eleanor, I know these developments with the girls are exciting, but you can't neglect your responsibilities. Perhaps we should discuss whether the stress is becoming unmanageable." There it was, the implication underneath the concern. Eleanor was losing her grip, letting emotion override reason, failing at the one thing she'd always excelled at: maintaining control. Dr. Morrison and Gerald were circling their wagons, preparing to protect Eleanor from herself. "Tell Gerald I'll call him tomorrow." Eleanor kept her voice ice cold. "And Richard, don't presume to diagnose my mental state based on Gerald Hutchinson's opinions about my work habits. I'm functioning just fine." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking from anger or fear, she couldn't tell. The walls were closing in. The careful structures she'd built to survive the past 5 years were crumbling, and everyone who'd helped her maintain them was panicking. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. Outside, November rain fell in sheets, turning the gardens into impressionist paintings. Somewhere out there, Caleb was probably at home, with Daisy going through the evening care routine, singing lullabies he'd learned from a dead man's notebook, refusing to accept limitations, believing in impossible things. An impulse seized Eleanor, reckless and completely unlike her. She grabbed her raincoat and car keys, told Mrs. Chen she'd be out for the evening, and drove into the rain before she could think better of it. Caleb's address was in his employment file. Eleanor had memorized it without intending to, the way she memorized all pertinent information. 23 minutes through rain-slicked streets brought her to Redmond, to a neighborhood where houses crowded together on small lots, where cars parked on lawns and chain-link fences separated properties. A world away from Bellevue Hills. She parked across the street from his building, 3 stories of weathered siding, paint peeling at the corners, surrounded by a cracked parking lot. Unit 2B, second-floor corner apartment. Eleanor sat in her Tesla with the engine running, wipers beating steady rhythm, and questioned her sanity. What was she doing here, spying on an employee, checking to make sure Caleb's home life matched her imagination? But she didn't leave. Couldn't leave. Some need she couldn't name kept her rooted in that parking spot, watching the lit windows of apartment 2B. At 6:30, the front door opened. Caleb emerged onto the small balcony, pushing a wheelchair. Eleanor's breath caught. Daisy. She could see the little girl from here, brown hair pulled into pigtails, wearing a pink sweatshirt with a butterfly on it. Small body held upright by careful padding and straps. Caleb positioned the wheelchair at the balcony's edge, angling it so Daisy could see the parking lot below the street beyond the rain falling through halos of streetlight. He knelt beside the wheelchair. Even from across the street, Eleanor could see his lips moving, see him pointing at something below, a bird maybe, or a cat darting between parked cars. Daisy's head tilted slightly, the only movement she seemed capable of. Caleb reached out and adjusted her hood, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, with such tenderness that Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest. This was his life. Not the competent janitor who helped her daughters, not the man who'd memorized Andrew's lullabies and earned Ruby and Pearl's first words. Just a father caring for his profoundly disabled child in a rundown apartment, finding joy in showing her raindrops and birds in ordinary evening beauty. Caleb bent forward and kissed the top of Daisy's head. Then he began to sing. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she recognized the melody. One of Andrew's lullabies. Caleb was singing to his own daughter the songs a dead man had written for different children, weaving them all together in a web of connection Eleanor didn't fully understand. Tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away impatiently, unwilling to miss a moment of the scene. Caleb wasn't a savior or a miracle worker or a man with inappropriate boundaries. He was just someone who refused to give up, who chose belief over despair every single day, who loved his daughter fiercely despite or because of all the ways she'd never meet the world's expectations. And he'd brought that same fierce love into Eleanor's home, had offered it freely to Ruby and Pearl without asking for anything in return. No wonder her daughters responded to him. They recognized something in his presence that had been missing from their lives: unconditional acceptance. Not therapy or intervention or desperate attempts at improvement. Just someone who saw them and decided they were perfect exactly as they existed. Eleanor sat in her car until Caleb wheeled Daisy back inside, until the balcony stood empty and rain-soaked. Then she drove home through streets that looked different somehow, as if she'd crossed into a parallel world where the same buildings and trees meant something new. At home, she went directly to the care room. Jennifer looked up in surprise. "Miss Ashford, I wasn't expecting you back tonight. Is everything all right?" Eleanor moved to Ruby's crib and looked down at her sleeping daughter. Everything was wrong and had been wrong for 5 years, but maybe, just maybe, there was a path back to something resembling right. "Has Mr. Winters responded to my email?" "Yes, ma'am." Jennifer consulted her phone. "He said to tell you he'll continue using Mr. Ashford's songs, and he hopes you find peace with whatever you're feeling." Eleanor almost laughed. Peace. As if peace were possible when your whole understanding of reality was disintegrating. She touched Ruby's hand, felt the familiar limp warmth of fingers that couldn't grasp back. "Jennifer," Eleanor kept her voice low, "what do you think of Mr. Winters' professional opinion?" The nurse hesitated, clearly weighing honesty against career preservation. Finally, she spoke. I think he's the best thing that's happened to these girls since I started working here. Not because of any special technique or method, just because he sees them as people instead of patients. And they know the difference, even though he's not qualified, even though he crosses boundaries. Sometimes boundaries exist to protect professionals, not patients. Jennifer's voice carried conviction. Eleanor hadn't heard before. Ruby and Pearl don't need more protected distance. They need someone willing to get messy with them, to sit on the floor and sing off key and believe impossible things. Mr. Winters does that. The rest of us just manage their care. The words settled into Eleanor's understanding, confirming what she'd witnessed in that Redmond parking lot. Caleb wasn't dangerous. He was just brave enough to love without guarantees to show up, without knowing if it would make any difference. Friday morning brought an unwelcome visitor. Gerald Hutchinson arrived at 9:30 unannounced, looking as he always did, 72 years old, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Mrs. Chen showed him to Eleanor's office with apologetic eyes. Gerald, Eleanor stood to greet him, keeping her voice pleasant. This is unexpected. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Gerald settled into the chair across from her desk without waiting for invitation. You've missed 2 board meetings, Eleanor. You haven't responded to any of my calls. I'm concerned. I've been dealing with family matters. Eleanor remained standing, a subtle power play. The girls have been experiencing some developmental changes that require my attention. Yes, Richard mentioned something about that. Gerald's tone suggested he found the entire topic distasteful. I'm glad the twins are improving. However, you have responsibilities beyond your personal life. Ashford Properties is at a critical juncture. The Portland development alone requires constant oversight, and you've been completely absent. I'm not absent. Eleanor kept her temper in check through sheer force of will. I review reports daily, make decisions as needed. My physical presence at every meeting isn't required. Your judgment is required. Gerald leaned forward, expression hardening. And frankly, Eleanor, your judgment lately has been questionable. You've been distracted, emotional, not the woman I've known for 20 years. This business needs the Eleanor Ashford who built it, cold, calculating, focused. Not someone who's falling apart over small progress with disabled children. The words hit like a slap. Eleanor felt her face go rigid, felt something dangerous rise in her chest. Get out of my office. Gerald blinked, clearly surprised. Excuse me? I said get out. Eleanor's voice dropped to lethal quiet. You came into my home and called my daughters, my children, a distraction. You implied that caring about their well-being makes me unfit to run my own company. So get out, now, before I say something we'll both regret. Eleanor, I didn't mean, yes, you did. Eleanor moved to the door and opened it. You meant every word. You think I should have stayed the frozen woman I became after Andrew died. You prefer the version of me who treated life like a series of transactions. Well, I'm done being that person. Ruby and Pearl deserve better. I deserve better. Gerald stood slowly, adjusting his tie. Fine. But understand this, if your performance continues to slip, if you continue neglecting the business, the board will have no choice but to take action. We have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Do what you need to do. Eleanor held the door open. Just do it somewhere that isn't my home. After he left, Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, shaking. The confrontation had cost her something, a protective layer she'd worn so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't actually her skin. Without it, everything felt raw and exposed. Dangerous, but also strangely liberating. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Girls are awake and alert. Good morning for visits if you're available. Eleanor abandoned her office and went to the care room. Ruby and Pearl were both sitting upright in their adaptive chairs, supported by careful positioning. The morning light fell across them in golden bars, highlighting their small faces. Eleanor pulled a chair close and sat at their level the way she'd seen Caleb do. Good morning, my loves. The endearment felt foreign in her mouth, unpracticed. Did you sleep well? Neither child responded. Eleanor hadn't expected them to, but she stayed anyway, talking to them about nothing in particular. The rain, the garden, the birds that visited the empty playground. Just filling the air with her voice, letting them hear her without demanding anything in return. 20 minutes passed, 30. Jennifer came and went, checking positions and supplies. Eleanor kept talking, kept being present, kept trying to channel whatever it was that Caleb brought into this room. Belief, patience, Unconditional acceptance. Ruby made a sound, small, soft, but deliberate. Eleanor froze mid-sentence. What was that, sweetheart? Eleanor leaned closer. Can you say it again? The little girl's mouth worked with visible effort. Her eyes, usually so unfocused, locked onto Eleanor's face with sudden clarity. Ma. The syllable came out broken but unmistakable. Ma. Eleanor's world stopped. Everything in her body went still. Her heartbeat thought itself. Then it all rushed back in a flood of sensations so overwhelming she couldn't process it. Her daughter. Her daughter had spoken to her, called her mama after 5 years of silence. Yes. Eleanor's voice cracked completely. Yes, baby. I'm mama. I'm right here. She reached out and touched Ruby's cheek, felt warm skin under her fingertips. Ruby didn't pull away or go blank the way she usually did. She maintained eye contact, held the connection. Let Eleanor be present in a way she'd never allowed before. Across the room, Pearl made a sound too. Not words, but a vocalization that carried intention. Both girls were trying. Both were reaching across the vast space that separated them from the speaking world, making the enormous effort required to connect. Eleanor gathered Ruby into her arms as much as the child's positioning allowed, pressing her face against her daughter's hair. She smelled like baby shampoo and clean cotton, like every child everywhere. Like the babies Eleanor used to hold before they stopped being babies and became medical cases before she'd stopped believing in miracles and started managing expectations. Thank you. Eleanor whispered it into Ruby's hair. Thank you for trying. Thank you for giving me another chance. She stayed in the care room for the next 3 hours, sitting with her daughters, talking to them, singing Andrew's lullabies from memory. Her voice was rough and unpracticed, nothing like Caleb's gentle murmur or Andrew's confident melody. But the girls listened anyway, watched her with focused attention, occasionally made small sounds that might have been attempts at speech or might have been simple contentment. Eleanor didn't care which. For the first time in 5 years, she felt like a mother instead of a manager and felt connected to these two small lives in a way that had nothing to do with medical protocols or therapeutic interventions. Just love. Simple, painful, impossible love. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Chen appeared in the care room doorway, expression apologetic. Mrs. Ashford, Dr. Morrison is here. He says you're expecting him. Eleanor had completely forgotten about the doctor's scheduled weekly visit. She considered sending him away, but Ruby and Pearl had finally dozed off in their chairs, exhausted from the morning's effort. She could spare an hour for medical consultation. In her office, Dr. Morrison sat with the careful posture of someone preparing for difficult conversation. Eleanor, I need to be direct with you. I've been in consultation with several colleagues about Mr. Winter's involvement with Ruby and Pearl. The consensus is clear: his presence represents an unacceptable risk. Risk of what exactly? Eleanor settled behind her desk, armoring herself with professional distance. Risk of attachment that won't be sustainable long-term. Risk of regression when he inevitably moves to another position. Risk of false hope that prevents you from accepting your daughter's realistic prognosis. The doctor ticked off concerns on his fingers. Eleanor, I know the progress seems remarkable, but we have no way to measure whether it's genuine development or temporary behavioral response to novel stimuli, without proper controls, without therapeutic oversight. They called me Mama this morning. Eleanor cut through his clinical analysis. Ruby said it clearly. Both girls were trying to communicate. That's not temporary behavioral response. That's my children learning to speak. Dr. Morrison's expression shifted to something between concern and pity, which is precisely my point. You're becoming emotionally invested in outcomes you can't control. That's dangerous for you and potentially harmful for the girls if their progress plateaus or reverses. So your advice is what? Eleanor kept her voice level. Fire the one person who's actually reaching them. Go back to managing their care from a safe distance. Protect myself by giving up on them again. The doctor flinched at the accusation underneath her words. I'm advising you to maintain appropriate boundaries, to let trained professionals handle therapeutic intervention while you focus on being their mother in ways that are sustainable for you emotionally. Being their mother means showing up. Eleanor leaned forward, intensity, breaking through her usual control. It means believing in them even when doctors say it's hopeless. It means sitting on the floor and singing off-key lullabies and celebrating every tiny sound like it's a symphony. That's what Caleb taught me. That's what Andrew tried to tell me before he died. And I'm done taking advice from people who think protecting myself matters more than connecting with my children. Dr. Morrison stood slowly gathering his tablet and bag. I can see you've made your decision. I hope you won't regret it when reality reasserts itself. I'll continue monitoring the girls, but I'm noting in their file that their mother is pursuing non-evidence-based interventions against medical advice. You do that. Eleanor remained seated, dismissing him with her posture. And Richard, thank you for everything you've done over the years. But from now on, you work for me, not the other way around. If I want your opinion on my parenting choices, I'll ask for it. After he left, Eleanor sat in silence, processing what she'd just done. She'd alienated her lead doctor, dismissed the concerns of her board member, essentially told everyone who'd helped her survive the past 5 years that their advice was no longer welcome. The old Eleanor, the one who'd built empires and negotiated billion-dollar deals, would never have made such reckless choices. But the old Eleanor hadn't been alive in any way that mattered. She'd been a ghost going through motions, maintaining structures that protected her from feeling anything real. If choosing Ruby and Pearl meant burning down those structures, so be it. Some things deserve to burn. That night, Seattle's weather turned violent. Winds screamed through the trees surrounding Ashford Estate, bending branches until they scraped against windows. Rain hammered the roof in sheets, overwhelming gutters and pooling on the driveway. Eleanor stood in her office, watching the storm intensify, and felt a matching turbulence in her chest. At 8:30, the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the house in dim artificial glow. Eleanor grabbed a flashlight from her desk drawer and headed toward the care room, instinct overriding thought. The girls would be frightened. They always were during storms, the change in air pressure and sharp sounds triggering some primal fear their limited nervous systems could still register. She found Jennifer already there, flashlight in hand, trying to soothe Ruby and Pearl. Both girls were crying, not the usual fussy discomfort, but real distress. Their small bodies trembled, faces contorted with fear. Pearl's breathing had gone rapid and shallow. Ruby's eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaming down her cheeks. How long have they been like this? Eleanor set her flashlight on a table, creating ambient light. Since the power went out. Jennifer's voice carried concern. I've tried everything, repositioning, checking for pain, offering comfort. Nothing helps. They're terrified. Eleanor moved to Ruby's crib and lifted her daughter out, holding the small body against her chest despite the awkward positioning required. Ruby continued crying her distress, finding no comfort in Eleanor's arms. The rejection hurt worse than Eleanor expected. After this morning's progress, after Ruby calling her mama, she'd thought, but what had she thought? That one word would erase 5 years of distance, that her daughters would suddenly recognize her as their primary source of comfort. Eleanor had spent their entire lives being absent in every way that mattered. Of course they didn't turn to her in crisis. Try calling Mr. Winters. The words came out before Eleanor fully decided to speak them. His number should be in the staff contacts. Jennifer looked surprised. Ma'am, it's nearly 9 o'clock. And in this weather, call him anyway. Eleanor kept her voice steady despite the chaos of her emotions. Tell him the girls are frightened and nothing we're doing helps. See if he has suggestions. The nurse pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway. Eleanor continued holding Ruby, rocking her, gently whispering reassurances that did nothing to calm the child's terror. Across the room, Pearl cried in her crib, small hands curled into fists, face red and wet with tears. Thunder cracked directly overhead. The whole house shook. Ruby's screams intensified, and Eleanor felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart exactly, but the protective shell around it. All her money and power and careful planning meant nothing in this moment. She couldn't fix her daughter's fear, couldn't make them feel safe, couldn't be what they needed no matter how desperately she wanted to. Jennifer returned, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, Mr. Winters. Thank you. I'll put Mrs. Ashford on. Eleanor shifted Ruby in her arms and took the phone. Caleb. His voice came through wind and rain sounds, slightly breathless. Mrs. Ashford, Jennifer said the girls are upset. Is everyone safe? Physically, yes. Eleanor watched Pearl continue crying in the crib. But they're terrified, Caleb. Nothing I do helps. I thought after this morning, after Ruby called me mama, I thought I was finally connecting with them. But they don't want me. They want... A crack appeared in her voice. She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say that her daughters wanted someone else. Wanted the janitor who'd been in their lives 3 weeks instead of the mother who'd carried them inside her body. Can you put the phone near them? Caleb's voice remained calm, steady. Let me try talking to them. Sometimes familiar voices help even through a phone line. Eleanor walked to Ruby's crib. She'd laid her daughter back down when taking the phone and set it on speaker between both cribs. You're on speaker now. They can hear you. Ruby. Pearl. Caleb's voice came through scratchy but recognizable. It's Caleb. I know you're scared, sweethearts. The storm is very loud and storms can be frightening. But Mommy is right there with you. She loves you so much. She's going to keep you safe. Ruby's crying quieted slightly. Pearl's tiny hands unclenched just a fraction. Eleanor watched heart hammering as Caleb's disembodied voice accomplished what her physical presence couldn't. I'm going to sing to you now. Caleb continued in that same gentle tone. Your daddy's song, the one he wrote for nights when you couldn't sleep. Remember, he began humming. Andrew's lullaby filtered through wind and rain and phone speakers, but unmistakable. The melody filled the dark care room steady and sure. Ruby's eyes opened, seeking the phone. Pearl turned her head toward the sound. The crying stopped. Not gradually, but all at once, as if Caleb's voice had flipped a switch in their frightened minds. They lay still, listening faces turned toward the phone that connected them to someone who believed in them even through a storm. Caleb sang the whole lullaby twice. By the second repetition, Ruby's eyes had drifted closed. Pearl's breathing had evened out. When the song ended, both girls lay peaceful, the terror drained from their small bodies. Thank you, Eleanor's voice came out barely above a whisper. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm home. Daisy gets frightened during storms too. I'm letting her sleep in my room tonight, keeping her close. Caleb paused. Mrs. Ashford, the girls don't love you any less because they responded to me. They're just used to my voice right now. That will change as you spend more time with them. You're their mother. That bond isn't broken. It's just buried. You'll find your way back to it. The words should have comforted Eleanor. Instead, they made her feel more bereft than before. Because Caleb was wrong. The bond wasn't buried. It had never fully formed in the first place. She'd been too traumatized by their diagnosis, too overwhelmed by Andrew's death, too busy surviving to actually mother them. And now they were 5 years old, and she was trying to build something that should have been established from birth. Good night, Caleb. Eleanor ended the call before he could hear her voice break. Thank you for this. She handed the phone back to Jennifer and stood between the cribs watching her daughter sleep. The storm continued outside, wind howling, rain, hammering thunder rolling across the sky. But in the care room, peace had been restored. Not by Eleanor's love or Jennifer's professional expertise, by a janitor singing through a phone line offering comfort he'd learned from caring for his own broken child. Eleanor stayed there until past midnight, watching Ruby and Pearl breathe, listening to the storm slowly pass. And she made a decision that would have terrified the woman she'd been just a week ago. She was going to ask Caleb Winters to become more than occasional presence in her daughter's lives. She was going to offer him something that would bind him to this family permanently, because her daughters needed him. And maybe, though she barely dared admit it, so did she. Saturday morning arrived with washed skies and the sharp clarity that follows violent weather. Eleanor woke at dawn having barely slept and found herself in the care room before Mrs. Chen had even started breakfast preparations. Ruby and Pearl still slept peacefully, faces relaxed in the pale light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Eleanor sat between their cribs and watched them breathe. Somewhere during the long night, clarity had crystallized from chaos. She knew what needed to happen. The question was whether she had the courage to actually do it. At 7:30, she returned to her office and composed an email to Caleb. No corporate pleasantries or careful distance this time. Just honesty, raw and unfiltered. Caleb. Last night proved something I've been avoiding for weeks. Ruby and Pearl need you in their lives permanently, not as an employee but as family. The West Wing has a 3-bedroom suite that's been empty since Andrew died. I'd like you and Daisy to move in. Rent-free, separate entrance, complete privacy. I'll double your current salary and provide full medical coverage for Daisy, whatever specialist she needs, whatever equipment would help her. This isn't charity. It's a fair arrangement. You help me care for Ruby and Pearl, and I help you care for Daisy. Please consider it. We need you, Eleanor. She sent it before fear could make her reconsider. Then she sat in the quiet office, hands trembling slightly, and waited. The response came 47 minutes later. Mrs. Ashford, I don't know what to say. This is extraordinarily generous, and I'm grateful you'd even consider it. But I need time to think. This isn't just about me. Daisy's whole life would change. I have to be sure it's the right thing for her. Can we meet this afternoon to discuss details? Caleb Eleanor exhaled relief she hadn't known she was holding. Not an immediate yes, but not rejection either. Just Caleb putting his daughter first, thinking carefully before making life-altering decisions. Exactly the kind of person she wanted around Ruby and Pearl. They arranged to meet at 2 o'clock. Eleanor spent the intervening hours in a state of nervous energy she couldn't remember experiencing since her wedding day. She changed outfits 3 times trying to find something that looked appropriate without seeming like she was trying too hard. Eventually settled on casual slacks and a soft sweater, approachable but still herself. Mrs. Chen noticed. The housekeeper said nothing, but Eleanor caught her small smile while she was setting out tea service in the office. The entire household staff seemed to understand something was shifting, though no one dared speak it aloud. Caleb arrived precisely at 2, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual janitor's uniform. He looked uncomfortable out of place in Eleanor's elegant office with its leather furniture and expensive art. She gestured him to sit, then took the chair beside him instead of positioning herself behind the desk. Equal footing, not employer-employee. Thank you for coming. Eleanor poured tea with hands that wanted to shake. I know my email was abrupt. I probably should have eased into the conversation. No, ma'am, you were direct. That's good. Caleb accepted the cup but didn't drink. I've been thinking about your offer since this morning, thinking about what it would mean for Daisy, for me, for your girls. And I'm scared. Caleb set down the cup, looking her directly in the eyes, not of living here or taking care of Ruby and Pearl. I'd do that gladly. I'm scared of what happens if it doesn't work out. If you decide later that having us here is a mistake, I can handle disappointment for myself, but Daisy, she's already lost so much. Her mother, a stable home, any kind of normal childhood. I can't let her get attached to a situation that might disappear. The honesty hit Eleanor hard. She'd been so focused on what her daughters needed that she hadn't fully considered the risk from Caleb's perspective. He was protecting his child the same way she'd been trying to protect hers by avoiding hope that might turn into fresh devastation. I understand. Eleanor chose her words carefully. You're right to be cautious. But Caleb, I'm not making this offer on impulse. I've been dying slowly for 5 years, and Ruby and Pearl have been dying with me. You brought us back to life. Whatever happens, whether the girls make more progress or plateau or even regress, I need you here. Not as a magic cure, but as someone who refuses to give up. That's not going anywhere. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to assess whether she meant it. What about your doctors? Your board members? The people who've been advising you all these years, they're not going to support this decision. No, they're not. Eleanor felt something settle into certainty, but they don't get to make this choice. I do. And I'm choosing my daughters over everyone else's comfort, including my own. What about money? Caleb shifted uncomfortably. You mentioned doubling my salary medical coverage for Daisy. That's too much, Mrs. Ashford. I can't accept charity disguised as employment. It's not charity. Eleanor leaned forward, intensity breaking through. Daisy needs specialists Ruby and Pearl already see. She needs equipment we already have. Sharing those resources costs me nothing extra. And the salary increase, that's because you'll be doing far more than janitorial work. You'll be co-parenting my children. That's worth 10 times what I'm offering. Caleb's jaw worked, emotion flickering across his weathered face. I need one condition. If I'm doing this, I won't be your employee anymore. He struggled for the right word, family. That means I get a voice in decisions about the girls. Not just following your instructions, but actually partnering with you in their care. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. That's exactly what I want. And one more thing. Caleb's voice dropped lower. I won't take the doubled salary. I'll accept fair compensation for my time, but I don't want money to be what defines this arrangement. If we're doing this as family, then we're doing it because we all need each other, not because you're buying my services. The words struck Eleanor as simultaneously noble and frustrating. She wanted to give him everything: security, stability, the kind of resources that could make Daisy's life easier. But she recognized his need to preserve dignity, to enter this arrangement on terms that felt equal rather than transactional. All right, Eleanor conceded. Standard salary for a live-in care specialist plus room and board. Medical coverage for Daisy as part of our household insurance. Does that work? Caleb nodded slowly. When would you want us to move in as soon as possible? Eleanor tried to keep desperation out of her voice. The West Wing is ready. Mrs. Chen can help you get settled. Bring whatever you need furniture. Daisy's equipment, anything that makes it feel like home. They shook hands, the gesture formal and strange, given the intimacy of what they were agreeing to. Caleb left with promises to sort out his current lease and begin packing. Eleanor sat alone in her office afterward, realizing she just made the most important decision of her life, and possibly the most reckless. Monday morning, Eleanor received a call from her attorney. Richard Pemberton had handled Ashford family legal matters for 30 years, had guided Eleanor through Andrew's estate. Settlement had become something between advisor and friend. His voice on the phone carried concerns she hadn't heard since the weeks after the plane crash. Eleanor, we need to talk about this living arrangement you're planning with your employee. Word travels fast. Eleanor kept her tone light despite tension coiling in her stomach. Gerald Hutchinson called me. Richard's professional mask was firmly in place. He's worried about legal exposure. Having a male non-family member living in your home with minor children present opens several areas of liability. If anything were to happen, nothing's going to happen. Eleanor cut through the implications. Caleb has been working here for a month. His background check was thorough. He's never given any indication of inappropriate behavior. That's not the point. Richard's voice gentled slightly. I'm sure Mr. Winters is a good person, but legally you're creating a situation that could be misinterpreted. What if he makes a claim that you promised him something beyond what's documented? What if there's an accident and he sues for damages? What if you trusted my judgment? Eleanor let steel enter her voice. I'm a grown woman making decisions about my own household. I don't need permission or protection from imaginary scenarios. The attorney was quiet for several beats. Then he spoke carefully. Eleanor, as your lawyer and your friend, I have to point out that your decision-making lately has been emotionally driven. That's understandable given the stress you're under, but emotions make poor foundation for legal arrangements. If you insist on moving forward with this at minimum, you need ironclad documentation, employment, contract, liability. Waivers clear boundaries about roles and responsibilities. Fine. Eleanor rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. Draft whatever documents you think are necessary, but understand this, Caleb Winters is moving into my home with his daughter this week. That's happening regardless of paperwork. After hanging up, Eleanor stood and walked to the window. Outside, early December, rain fell in sheets, turning the gardens into watercolor impressions. The empty playground stood abandoned swings moving in wind-driven arcs. Everything looked exactly as it had for 5 years. Beautiful, expensive, lifeless. That was about to change. For better or worse, Eleanor was choosing chaos over control, hope over protection. If it destroyed her, at least she'd die trying, rather than existing in comfortable numbness. Tuesday brought unwelcome attention of a different kind. Eleanor's assistant intercepted her on the way to the care room, face pale with distress. Mrs. Ashford, there's a situation. A reporter from Seattle Times called asking about your relationship with a staff member. They're planning to run a story about, she hesitated clearly, uncomfortable about you and Mr. Winters, implying there's something inappropriate happening. Eleanor's blood went cold. Who gave them information they wouldn't say? Just that they have sources confirming Mr. Winters is moving into your home. They're framing it as a romance between a wealthy widow and her employee. The gossip would be brutal. Eleanor could already imagine the headlines, the knowing speculation, the way this would be twisted into scandal. Lonely billionaire finds comfort with handsome janitor. Never mind that Caleb was weathered and ordinary looking, that their arrangement had nothing to do with romance, that 3 disabled children were at the center of this decision. Facts wouldn't matter once the narrative took hold. Get our PR firm on the phone. Eleanor made the decision quickly. We're getting ahead of this. Draft a statement explaining that Mr. Winters is a care specialist with expertise in pediatric disabilities, that his daughter has similar needs to Ruby and Pearl, that this is a mutually beneficial arrangement focused entirely on the children's well-being. Make it boring and clinical. Give them nothing salacious to work with. The assistant nodded and hurried off. Eleanor continued to the care room, fury and fear warring in her chest. She'd known there would be consequences to her decision, but having them manifest so quickly felt like ambush. Someone on her staff had talked to reporters. Someone who disapproved enough to sabotage her. In the care room, she found Jennifer reading to Ruby and Pearl. The nurse looked up with an expression that immediately told Eleanor she'd heard about the media situation. I didn't say anything. Jennifer spoke before Eleanor could ask. I would never betray your confidence. But Mrs. Ashford, you should know some of the other staff are uncomfortable with Mr. Winters moving in. There's been talk, people making assumptions. What kind of assumptions? Eleanor felt exhaustion settle into her bones. That you're lonely, that maybe this isn't just about the girls. Jennifer's voice carried no judgment, just statement of fact. I've tried to shut it down, explain that I've watched Mr. Winters with Ruby and Pearl, that he's genuinely focused on their well-being. But people believe what they want to believe. Let them believe whatever makes them comfortable. Eleanor moved to Ruby's crib and looked down at her sleeping daughter. The only opinions that matter are in this room. Ruby and Pearl need Caleb. That's the beginning and end of the discussion. But privately, Eleanor wondered if she was being naive, if maybe there was something more to her decision than pure maternal instinct. She'd felt something shift when she watched Caleb care for Daisy, had experienced connections she couldn't entirely explain when he'd sung through the phone during the storm. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. The sense of finding someone who understood suffering in the same cellular way she did. Was that enough to build a family on? Or was she simply replacing Andrew's ghost with a living substitute, trying to recreate something that could never be replicated? Eleanor didn't have answers. She only had certainty that without Caleb, Ruby and Pearl would retreat back into silence. And that outcome was unacceptable, regardless of what it cost her reputation or peace of mind. Wednesday afternoon, the Seattle Times ran their story. Eleanor's PR firm had managed to soften it somewhat, but the headline still made her stomach clench. Ashford heiress invites employee into home following daughter's rare progress. The article was technically factual, mentioned Caleb's background in pediatric care facilities, noted his daughter's medical needs, quoted Eleanor's statement about mutually beneficial arrangements. But the subtext screamed through every carefully worded paragraph. Lonely widow, convenient romance, questions about appropriate boundaries with hired help. The comment section was predictably vicious. Eleanor made the mistake of reading it and immediately regretted the decision. Strangers dissecting her choices, speculating about her motives, making crude jokes about private care and full-time staff. She closed her laptop with shaking hands and sat in the gathering darkness of her office, trying to remember why she thought this was a good idea. Her phone rang, Caleb's number. Eleanor answered with dread coiling in her chest. I saw the article. His voice was tight with some emotion she couldn't identify. But Ashford, if this is going to damage you, if people are going to assume things that aren't true, maybe we should reconsider the arrangement. I don't want to be the reason your reputation gets destroyed. My reputation has survived worse. Eleanor surprised herself with how much she meant it. And honestly, Caleb, anyone who thinks I'd risk my daughter's well-being for a romantic entanglement doesn't know me at all. Let them talk. Are you sure? Because once we do this, once I move in with Daisy, there's no walking it back without making things worse. The gossip will intensify. Your board might use it as ammunition to question your judgment. Probably. Eleanor looked out at the darkened gardens, at the empty playground, slowly disappearing into night. But I've been living for other people's approval for 5 years. I'm done with that. Ruby and Pearl deserve a mother who chooses them over reputation management. Caleb was quiet for so long, Eleanor thought the call had dropped. Then he spoke, voice rough with emotion. All right, Daisy and I will be there Saturday morning, if you're really sure. I'm sure. Eleanor realized it was true. Underneath the fear and doubt and awareness of consequences, she was absolutely certain. See you Saturday? Friday passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Chen supervised cleaning crews, making the West Wing spotless. Eleanor ordered new furniture, medical equipment, everything Daisy might need. She found herself obsessing over small details, which bedroom Daisy should have, whether the bathroom modifications were sufficient, if the private entrance would give them enough separation to feel truly autonomous. Jennifer found her standing in the West Wing at midnight, staring at empty rooms soon to be filled. It's going to be okay, Mrs. Ashford. The nurse spoke quietly from the doorway. You're doing the right thing, even if it's also the hardest thing. How do you know? Eleanor didn't turn around. How do you know this won't be a disaster that hurts everyone involved? Because I've watched you with Ruby and Pearl this past week. Jennifer moved into the room, standing beside Eleanor. You're different. more present, more connected. Whatever Caleb brings into this house, it's already started healing something in you. That's worth the risk. Eleanor blinked back tears. She'd cried more in the past 10 days than in 5 years combined. The protective ice she'd wrapped around herself was melting, leaving her raw and vulnerable and terrified. But also, underneath the fear, strangely alive. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright winter sun glinting off frost-covered gardens. Eleanor woke at 5, too nervous to sleep longer. She dressed carefully, jeans, a soft sweater, nothing too formal. Today was about family, not business. She needed to look like someone a 5-year-old could approach without fear. At 8:30, a battered pickup truck pulled into the circular driveway. Eleanor watched from the foyer window as Caleb stepped out, then moved to the passenger side. He opened the door carefully and reached inside, lifting something with practiced ease. A car seat, with Daisy strapped into it. Eleanor's heart clenched. From this distance, she could see the little girl's small face, see the careful way Caleb positioned her, see his lips moving as he spoke to his daughter. Then he retrieved a bag from the truck bed and carried both toward the front door. Mrs. Chen opened it before he could knock. Eleanor stood in the foyer, suddenly uncertain. She'd invited this man and his disabled daughter to live in her home, had upended her entire life to make this possible. But now that the moment had arrived, she had no idea what to say or do. "Welcome home." The words came out before Eleanor consciously chose them. "Come in, please." Caleb stepped across the threshold. Daisy's car seat held securely in his arms. "Morning, Mrs. Ashford." He seemed as uncertain as Eleanor felt. "This is Daisy. Daisy, sweetie, this is Mrs. Ashford. Remember I told you about her and her 2 daughters?" Eleanor knelt to bring herself to Daisy's eye level. The little girl looked back at her with dark eyes that held Andrew's same depth. Her face was asymmetrical from muscle rigidity, head tilted permanently to one side, but beneath the physical constraints, Eleanor saw intelligence, awareness, a complete person trapped inside a body that wouldn't cooperate. "Hello, Daisy." Eleanor kept her voice gentle. "I'm so happy you're here. My girls, Ruby and Pearl, can't wait to meet you." Daisy made a sound, not quite vocalization, more like a breath with intention behind it. Caleb's face lit up. "She's saying hello." He interpreted his daughter's communication with the ease of long practice. "That's her happy sound." Mrs. Chen appeared with perfect timing. "Mr. Winters, would you like me to show you to your rooms? Everything's been prepared as Mrs. Ashford requested." Caleb nodded gratefully and followed the housekeeper toward the west wing. Eleanor remained kneeling in the empty foyer, processing what she'd just seen. The way Caleb held his daughter secure but not restrictive, protective but allowing her dignity. The way he'd translated her small sound into meaningful communication. The absolute comfort between them despite the enormous challenges they faced daily. That was what Eleanor wanted for Ruby and Pearl. That certainty of connection, that refusal to see limitation as barrier to love. She stood and walked to the care room. Jennifer had the twins positioned for a good morning, both in their adaptive chairs, faces clean and ready. Eleanor sat between them. "We have new family members today." Eleanor spoke as if her daughters understood every word the way Caleb always did. "Mr. Winters and his daughter Daisy just arrived. Daisy is exactly your age, and she has a body that doesn't work right either. But her daddy sees her, really sees her the way I'm learning to see you. And I hope you'll all become friends." Neither girl responded outwardly, but Eleanor imagined she saw something flicker in Ruby's eyes. Interest, maybe, or just the random neural firing doctors would insist meant nothing. Eleanor chose to believe it meant something. An hour later, Caleb appeared in the care room doorway. He'd changed into fresh clothes, looked slightly less exhausted. Behind him, Daisy sat in a specialized wheelchair, her small body supported by careful padding. "Is it okay if we come in?" Caleb's voice carried uncertainty. "I thought maybe Daisy could meet the girls." "Please." Eleanor stood and moved aside, giving them space. Caleb wheeled Daisy into the room, positioning her where she could see Ruby and Pearl. For a long moment, the 3 children simply looked at each other. 3 5-year-olds with profound disabilities, bodies that wouldn't cooperate, minds trapped behind walls of neurological damage. But Eleanor saw something else: recognition. The kind of instant understanding that happens when people who've suffered similarly find each other. Ruby made a sound, small, soft, but directed clearly at Daisy. "Hi, sweetie." Caleb's voice was gentle. "Yes, that's Daisy. Can you say her name, Daisy Da? Ruby tried mouth-working with visible effort. D. Pearl echoed from her chair. D. Daisy made her breath sound again, louder this time. Her eyes stayed locked on the twins, and Eleanor watched something happen that she'd never seen in her daughter's face's pure joy. They were smiling, actually smiling muscles pulling their features into expressions of delight that had nothing to do with reflexes or random nerve firing. They like each other. Caleb's voice cracked. Look at them. They understand each other. Eleanor couldn't speak. Could only watch three children communicating in a language that required no words connecting across the vast isolation of their individual struggles. This was what she'd hoped for without knowing how to articulate it. Not a cure or a miracle, just connection. The knowledge that they weren't alone. Jennifer appeared with mid-morning feeding supplies. Oh, she stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Oh, Mrs. Ashford, look at their faces. I know. Eleanor couldn't stop staring. They're happy. The word felt foreign and perfect simultaneously. When was the last time she'd seen Ruby and Pearl genuinely happy? When had they expressed anything beyond passive acceptance or distressed crying? This was different. This was life. Caleb began humming Andrew's lullaby inevitably, and all three girls turned toward the sound. Their faces held identical expressions of contentment. Three children who'd been told they couldn't connect, couldn't communicate, couldn't experience normal childhood joy. Proving all the experts wrong simply by being together. Eleanor backed quietly out of the room, leaving Caleb to manage the moment. She made it to the hallway before tears overwhelmed her. She leaned against the wall and let them come 5 years of grief and loss and carefully suppressed hope, finally finding release. Her daughters were happy. Whatever happened next, whatever obstacles they faced, whatever challenges lay ahead in this moment, Ruby and Pearl were genuinely, completely happy. That was worth everything she'd risked. The first week with Caleb and Daisy in residence passed in adjustment and small revelations. Eleanor discovered that her enormous house felt less empty, with children's sounds drifting through it, not just Ruby and Pearl's occasional vocalizations, but Daisy's distinctive breathing patterns, Caleb's gentle voice reading bedtime stories, the mechanical hum of specialized equipment running at odd hours. Dr. Morrison made his weekly visit and nearly had a stroke when he found Daisy in the care room alongside Ruby and Pearl. The three girls were positioned in a semicircle, Caleb sitting on the floor between them, showing them picture books and narrating in exaggerated voices. Mrs. Ashford, a word. The doctor's tone promised lecture. Eleanor followed him into the hallway. This is highly irregular. Dr. Morrison spoke with barely controlled frustration. Introducing a third disabled child into the therapeutic environment, allowing an untrained parent to manage all three, simultaneously you're creating chaos that could undo any progress Ruby and Pearl have made. Or I'm giving them what they've needed all along. Eleanor kept her voice level. Peer interaction, the chance to not be the only broken children in the room. Look at them, Richard. Really look. They're engaged in ways they never were during isolated therapy sessions. The doctor glanced through the open door. Eleanor followed his gaze and saw what she hoped he'd see, 3 small faces turned toward Caleb, 3 sets of eyes tracking his movements, 3 children participating in a story hour that had nothing to do with medical intervention and everything to do with simple human connection. It's not controlled. Dr. Morrison's protest sounded weaker. We can't measure outcomes or replicate protocols. Good. Eleanor cut him off. Maybe it's time we stopped trying to control every variable and just let them be children. Your measurements and protocols haven't helped them in 5 years. Caleb's presence helped them in 3 weeks. I'm going with what works, not what looks good in medical journals. She left him standing in the hallway and returned to the care room. Caleb looked up as she entered, question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. Everything's fine, and settled into one of the chairs against the wall. Just watching. Just being present in her daughter's lives in a way she'd forgotten was possible. That night, Eleanor worked late in her office, reviewing contracts she'd been neglecting. A soft knock interrupted around 10 o'clock. Caleb stood in the doorway looking exhausted but content. Sorry to bother you, his voice was low, mindful of sleeping children. I wanted to say thank you for all of this. Daisy's happier than I've seen her in months. Having other kids around, having proper equipment, not worrying constantly about money, it's everything I wanted for her, but couldn't provide on my own. Eleanor set down her pen. You're giving Ruby and Pearl something I couldn't provide either. Fair trade. Caleb smiled slyly. Your daughter's called you Mama today. Did Jennifer tell you Eleanor's breath caught? When during afternoon therapy, Ruby said it twice, Pearl once, clear as anything. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. They're finding their voices, Mrs. Ashford, both literally and figuratively. They're starting to believe they can communicate that people will listen if they traced him. That's what changes everything, not the mechanics of speech production, but the belief that speaking matters. The words settled into Eleanor's chest, warm and painful simultaneously. Thank you for believing in them when I'd stopped. You never stopped. Caleb's voice was gentle. You just protected yourself so well it looked like giving up. But you're here now. That's what matters. After he left, Eleanor sat in the quiet office thinking about belief and protection and the fine line between them. She'd spent 5 years building walls to survive grief. Those walls had kept her functional, but had also kept her isolated from the very people who needed her most. Caleb had somehow gotten past her defenses, not by attacking them, but by simply being present until she chose to lower them herself. Was that what healing looked like? Not dramatic breakthroughs or miraculous cures, but just showing up consistently until connection became possible again. Eleanor closed her laptop and went upstairs to her bedroom. But instead of going inside, she found herself walking down the hallway toward the care room. Inside, night lighting cast soft shadows. Ruby and Pearl slept peacefully in their cribs, faces relaxed, breathing steady. Eleanor pulled a chair close and sat watching them sleep. Their features had changed in the past 2 weeks, not physically, but in some qualities she couldn't quantify. They looked less like patients and more like children. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. I see you now, Eleanor whispered into the quiet room. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I finally see you. Not your limitations or your diagnoses or all the ways you don't match what I expected. Just you, Ruby and Pearl, my daughters. And you're perfect exactly as you are. Neither girl stirred, but Eleanor sat there until past midnight anyway, keeping vigil, making up for 5 years of absence with simple presence. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was a start. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, looking out at 300 guests gathered for the inaugural gala of the Andrew Ashford Foundation for Children with Disabilities. The room glowed with candlelight and champagne. Seattle's elite turned out in formal wear, checkbooks ready. But Eleanor's attention kept drifting to the far corner where 3 wheelchairs formed a small cluster. Ruby, Pearl, and Daisy, all dressed in matching navy dresses with white collars. The girls had insisted on matching, communicating their preference through a combination of vocalizations and the simple picture board communication system Caleb had introduced. Jennifer and Caleb flanked them, keeping watch, but allowing the girls to observe the party from their position. Mrs. Ashford Gerald Hutchinson appeared at her elbow, looking considerably humbler than he had 6 months ago. The board wanted me to convey their appreciation for your vision with the foundation. We were skeptical about diverting company resources to this project, but the response has been extraordinary. Every major donor in the city showed up tonight. Thank you, Gerald. Eleanor kept her voice pleasant but distant. Their relationship had never recovered from his comments about her daughters being a distraction. He remained on the board because removing him would create more problems than it solved, but the friendship was dead. And may I say, Gerald cleared his throat uncomfortably, you look happy, genuinely happy. Whatever changes you've made in your personal life, they're clearly beneficial. Before Eleanor could respond, Caleb appeared beside her. Sorry to interrupt. Ruby's asking for you, well saying mama repeatedly and getting frustrated when you don't materialize. Eleanor excused herself immediately, following Caleb through the crowd. They'd perfected this dance over the past 6 months, him interpreting the girls' communications, her responding, both of them working as a seamless unit in ways that continued to surprise Eleanor. They weren't romantic partners despite ongoing gossip to the contrary, but they'd become something more complicated and more valuable, co-parents bound by shared commitment to 3 extraordinary children. Mama. Ruby's vocalization was clearer than it had been even a month ago. Speech therapy combined with genuine motivation to communicate had created remarkable progress. Not normal speech, probably never would be, but functional enough that Eleanor could usually understand what her daughter wanted. I'm here, sweetheart. Eleanor knelt beside Ruby's wheelchair, bringing herself to eye level. Are you having fun at the party? The little girl made a sound Eleanor had learned meant yes, then pointed toward the stage where a string quartet was setting up. Music. You want to hear music? Eleanor smiled. They're going to play very soon. Can you wait a few more minutes? Ruby nodded, actual head movement, deliberate and controlled. 6 months of intensive therapy combined with genuine will to communicate had given her voluntary control over muscles doctors insisted she'd never command. Not perfect control, not easy, but possible. Beside her, Pearl made a soft sound. Daisy responded with her distinctive breath pattern. The three girls had developed their own communication system, one that went beyond words or conventional language. Watching them interact, Eleanor sometimes felt like she was witnessing the creation of a new dialect built from gesture and sound and pure intention. Your speech is in 10 minutes. Caleb checked his watch. Are you ready? Eleanor stood smoothing her dress. As ready as I'll ever be. You'll be great. Caleb's confidence was matter of fact. You're talking about something you are passionate about. That's all these people need to hear. Eleanor made her way to the stage as the quartet finished warming up. The room fell quiet, 300 faces turning toward her expectantly. She gripped the podium looking out at the crowd donors and board members and society figures, all curious about Eleanor Ashford's dramatic transformation from grieving recluse to disability advocate. Good evening. Eleanor's voice came out steady despite nerves. Thank you all for joining us tonight. 6 months ago, I stood in my house and realized I'd been living half a life. I'd spent 5 years managing my daughter's care while forgetting to actually be their mother. I'd convinced myself that accepting their limitations was the same as loving them. I was wrong. She paused, letting the confession settle. In the back corner, Caleb gave her a small nod of encouragement. The Andrew Ashford Foundation exists because my husband understood something I'd forgotten, that children with disabilities don't need us to fix them. They need us to see them, to believe in them, to create spaces where they can thrive exactly as they are. She glanced toward Ruby, Pearl, and Daisy. My daughters taught me that, with help from someone who refused to accept that their silence was permanent. Eleanor continued describing the foundation's mission: funding adaptive equipment for families who couldn't afford it, supporting research into non-invasive therapies, creating community spaces where disabled children could interact without judgment or pressure to meet developmental milestones. The audience listened with increasing engagement, several people pulling out phones to make donation commitments on the spot. When Eleanor finished and stepped away from the podium, the applause was genuine and sustained. She made her way back to the girls feeling lighter than she had in years. Whatever came next, whether Ruby and Pearl continued progressing or plateaued, whether the foundation succeeded or struggled, whether her unorthodox family arrangement worked long-term, she was present for it. Finally, actually present. That's my mama, Ruby said clearly, as Eleanor approached, pointing with visible pride. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She knelt between all three wheelchairs, gathering her daughters and Daisy into an awkward group embrace. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your mama, and you are my whole heart. The evening wound down around 11. Guests departed with promises of future support, leaving behind substantial donation commitments. Mrs. Chen supervised cleanup, while Eleanor helped Caleb load the girls into the specially modified van they now used for family outings. They drove back to Bellevue Hills through quiet streets, three tired children dozing in their car seats, two adults who'd become family without quite meaning to, riding in companionable silence. When they pulled into the circular driveway, Eleanor looked up at the house, all-lit windows and warm light spilling onto frosted lawns, and felt something she hadn't experienced in half a decade. Home. Not just a structure filled with expensive furniture and painful memories. Actual home where imperfect people loved each other fiercely and built meaning from the wreckage of their broken expectations. Caleb carried Daisy inside while Eleanor managed Ruby. Jennifer met them in the foyer to help with Pearl. Together, they made their way to the care room, now expanded to accommodate 3 children, 3 cribs positioned in a semicircle, so the girls could see each other even while sleeping. The nighttime routine had become ritual, changing into pajamas, checking medical equipment, administering medications, positioning bodies carefully to prevent complications. Caleb and Eleanor worked in synchronized silence, each knowing their role, both committed to making the process as gentle as possible. When all 3 girls were settled, Caleb began humming. Andrew's lullaby, the one from the notebook, the melody that had started this whole transformation. Ruby's eyes drifted closed. Pearl's breathing deepened. Daisy made her contented breath sound and relaxed into sleep. Eleanor stood beside Caleb watching their daughters because that's what they'd become, their daughter's biology, less important than daily care, and unconditional love, settle into peaceful sleep. Outside, winter wind whispered through bare trees. Inside, three children who'd been told they'd never connect, never communicate, never experience normal childhood joy, breathed in perfect synchronization. Thank you. Eleanor spoke so quietly she almost didn't realize she'd said it aloud. For all of this, for refusing to give up on them, on me. Caleb glanced at her small smile playing at the corners of his weathered face. We saved each other. That's what family does. They stood there until all three girls had fallen completely asleep. Then they turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft night glow, and walked together into the hallway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Therapy sessions, foundation business, the ongoing work of raising three profoundly disabled children. But tonight in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Eleanor paused at her office door, looking back toward the care room where soft sounds of sleeping children drifted into the quiet house. For the first time since Andrew's death, since Ruby Imperial's diagnosis, since the long nightmare began, she felt grateful. Not despite the challenges, but somehow because of them. Because they'd led her here to this reconstructed family, to this hard-won peace. She heard Caleb's door close in the west wing, heard the house settle into nighttime silence. And Eleanor smiled, really smiled, the way Andrew used to say, lit up her whole face and went to bed with hope, warm in her chest where ice had been for so very long. The story wasn't over, but for tonight it was enough.